Okay, karibu everyone to Swahili Nations um, program. And we start, as we always do, with a prayer to the ancestors to give us wisdom, to give us understanding, to share knowledge and information, and to receive the same with grace. So, thank you all for joining. Asante Sana. I see we have Oni Habari in the comments. Welcome. And everybody else, thank you for joining. So it's been a while, I know. And I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be here. It's one of those it's long, but it's always good to be on SNN. So and before we begin, let me just remind everyone of the present campaign we're having for the office and for for equipment and maintaining the site and so on. So you can always go to SNN on the GoFundMe page, so to show your support and thank you again. So the subject of discussion today is African traditions, and we've always been talking about tradition. My main area of interest was looking at the past with a view to the present, to the future too, but to the present especially. And sometimes, we as Africans, we look at our traditions and we say, oh, this was the way things were done in the past and so on. And tradition, culture includes everything. It includes language, and it includes our attitude, our mentality, our ways of relating with each other, um, even the way we define ourselves. For example, most African communities were very how do you extended. Yeah, it was a more extended form of the family unit than um, than the present nuclear, mostly Western nuclear families. Not that the nuclear is not extended; they also have grandparents and so on. But the emphasis is usually on the nuclear family unit, mother, father, and children. So, whereas in African traditions, your close relations included, your cousin. I don't know what is cousin, but you had your um, I don't know, the aunt of your mother or something like that. You can always trace, as long as you're related to somebody up to your grandfather, up to your great great grandfather, you're always, sort of, related to them. So your family unit was very big. The people you considered your family was very big. Um, a very extensive network, and one that went on both sides, on the mother's and the father's side. So family was very big, and also even in terms of creating family, people had a lot of children. They still do. Nowadays this is decreased a bit, but in the past, and there were reasons for that as well. But people used to have more children in the past. They used to have big families. So those are the parts of tradition that we look at when we look at the whole traditional culture. It includes a lot more than just the rituals and practices that we used to do. So in those terms, we have to see whether um, we have to first of all familiarize ourselves with those traditions, because a lot of them are just going by the wayside, only because some of them are not being passed down. Some people choose to forgo, for example, in the area of language. Some people don't necessarily learn the language of the preceding generation. So in this day and age, you can well, possibly you can possibly get by. Hey, Cassandra. Hi, Cassandra. Good to have you in the house. Yes, I know. It's been a while. It's been a while. Habari, dada. Yes. So it has been a while, but I'm glad to have you in the house. Habari na karibu. You should know a little bit enough of this one, right? Let's see. Uh, yes, thank you, thank you. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you finally caught the light. Okay, so let me take a second to say hello. Um, Thank you, Oni. I hope it will be. Um, and sister Dada Kasidra, karibu sana. Thank you for joining. And you've been on the continent. I know you may have something to say about that as well. So it's really for all our consideration. There are some things that firstly we need to know what they are, and then we need to know you know um, what we can do with them going forward. So as I was saying with culture encompasses a whole lot from from language, from social etiquette to to the relations, to how you define yourself and your family and the people close to you. So it's a great deal. It has the aspects of language. It has rules and regulations and so on, and even worship to some extent. But we'll keep it mostly on the practices. So African culture, was it something that fostered community, um, and it gave, yes, it fosters community, and it gave the people rules and regulations to, I would say, guidelines, or guidelines, and then how to deal with certain situations. So if there was infractions of the law, or if there was the rituals to be kept and so on, I think that was what the tradition was. For the most part, it wasn't a written system. Okay, I know probably some people had written cultures, but it was mostly passed down generationally from the elders to the rest of society, and they got it also from the previous generation before them. So it was passed down that way, and somehow everyone knew the rules. Everyone was privy to the same information because it was passed down equally, and also to different levels. So you had the older people to the older children teaching the younger, and so on. So that's how it was transmitted, and that's also a cultural aspect of much of African knowledge, that it was passed from person to person, and therefore it is very easy to to wipe out, because it's not pushed down. It depends on the survival and existence of the people to actually carry it. So the law is actually inside the people, not in a book or somewhere where you can refer to. I'm talking about mostly the traditional oral society. There are exceptions, obviously, but for the most part, it was transmitted, from person to person. So that was good in a way that, firstly, it kept those traditions within a select group of people. It was, for example, in the tribal system, it would only the people who were in that tribe would have access to that information, because it was not written down somewhere where another person could refer to it. So in terms of of keeping the society together, it fostered that quite a lot, because you did have to be part of that society to have access to the tradition, including the language. So that was oh yes, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. You saying being on the continent was life changing. Yeah, yeah, it's great to be out there. I hope you had some great experiences. And some not so great ones. Everything, there's no paradise on earth. Everything can't be 100% perfect. Even when you come to the best place, there's always something wrong with it. So yeah, but I think what's important too is being able to be willing to go outside and then see something that is different. That's why traveling is so vital for the development of human beings, because it opens your eyes to a different aspect of life, to a different culture and customs, and you see the variety of how people have organized life, their community, the environment, and so on, and the result of that. So, African culture was good in some aspects, in many aspects. One of that was the communal um, care, the communal care of all members of society. I think that's even though the traditions and were practiced in different ways all over the continent, for the most part, the principle was one of that everyone works hard, that they respect within the community, and everybody is taken care of. It was something that was important from the old people, the young people. The society's needs were every individual needs was societal needs. So while you're expected to work hard, to do your duty, to be respectful, and so on, you also expected that you'd be taken care of by society. If something happens. Now, obviously, that was not always possible, but some of those rules and customs were there in place to take care of those contingencies. So. Okay, so Kasida is saying if you haven't gone, you should go. Yes. And one thing too about traveling is that it challenges also your assumptions about how things are supposed to be or how things are. You see things done in a different way, and that's what also we are looking at when it comes to tradition. You're also looking at, you're almost like you're traveling through time. You're looking at things and you're looking how they developed, how they changed. And people say that people think that African traditions are rigid, or that people are stuck in their ways and so on. And to some extent, that's true, because a lot of those things go back a long, long, long time. No, sometimes people don't even know, where they came from. They just know the story and they know how it was passed on to them. So yes, it's rooted in the deep past or in the recent one, but in any way, it's something that goes back a long way. But the other aspect of it, of the transmission, especially the direct transmission, is that it's also adaptable. It's not. Also, has room to to look at the present, to take it in, and to change. And this is also why when you see the African culture, there's such a great diversity in terms of not just the practice, but also the embracing of different practices. So we are traditional in a way, in our cultures, but at the same time we're not completely rigid and against immalleable. So when Africans see something, even though they are traditional in one way, they're usually able to see, still adapt and grasp the new system, because that's what tradition is. It's simply passed on from one generation to another, and it will be up to the next generation to pass it. But they will only pass it in the way that they have received it. So they will modify it in a way through their experiences, through their own wisdom. And so even though people look at tradition as being this set in stone kind of thing, it's actually set in the hearts and bodies of men and women, of course. So tradition is actually not as rigid as people seem to think of it. Now the rules, the principles are rigid. If it's the principle of respect, that might take a while. Or if it's the practice of um, uh, Yeah, I would think of respect. I would think of, a certain kind of social decorum. Those things are usually deeply rooted. Even the attitude of hospitality, of welcoming people, those things are deeply rooted in many African traditions. So, sasa mwandachezi. Fit sana, fit sana. Poa. Yes. So, yeah, let me take a moment to say hi. Yes. So we're good. We're good. Um, yeah. So when we look at that, you also have to look at the adaptability of society. And so a traditional society is actually more malleable than one that is based on written languages. For example, if you take most countries, most European countries, I think they have constitutions, I'm not sure. But in any case, they have a historical legacy going, back hundreds of years with, written histories and so on. And then, even in the American system, they have the constitution. And for the most part, once something is written down, it's very difficult to change it. You can amend it, like the constitution. I think it has been amended, is it 21 times or more than that probably? But yeah, so once something is written in stone, it does not matter. The future generations will have to abide by something that was written, before there was the internet, before all of this. So a written tradition is more enduring in that aspect, because, each additional generation can only marginally add to what is already there. Whereas for an oral tradition, one generation can pretty much change the entire culture. Not completely, but they can make drastic changes to to how things were practiced, because it's really up to them, to accept or reject the guides of the past, or of their parents and grandparents. So that is why in African traditional societies, it was very important for the people, for example, for the older people to have, power over the younger members of society, because they had that power of knowledge and wisdom and just general, power, that power of persuasion. They had that, and they had the respect of the people. Well, they did have to earn it. It was not just given to them automatically. But once you increased your power with your increase in in age. So that's how you almost climbed the societal ranks, not in the social mobility way, but that is how your station in life changed. So what we can say is, as much as those practices were useful for those times, are they still, is that something that we should plumb, we should look into and see whether we can use, or are those, simply, things that are in the past and we should try to embrace? Because did they, at the end of the day, did they help us, in our modern situation, or did they hinder us from becoming more, from becoming more? Would we have been better if we had stuck to, or kept more? I know that we have not, it's not that we have totally lost it, just like language and all that. So language as a main aspect of culture is still very much practiced all over Africa. Most people, a lot of people still speak their traditional languages. A lot of people still practice, some, it's like a mixture of different times. You have the traditions mixed in with the future, mixed in with the city and so on. The life in the city is also, has its differences from the countryside. So there's a lot of variations on how Africans relate to their tradition, and to their cultural identity as Africans. Um, yes. So you're saying, oh, Sister Casita is saying, Yes, but I think they now need to allow the younger folk to intermingle with the older adults so both can learn. Yes, definitely. I agree that there should be more interaction between the young and the old. But at the same time, traditionally, it was power was passed down from the younger, from the older to the younger. So it would be um, so the elders would have a lot more power in the making of decisions than in present times. But as you can see, in present times, there are some problems or some situations that the older generation might not really be able to fully understand. When it comes to the global trade, when it comes to technology and so many of these issues were not a major factor when for the previous generations. So in that regards, there are also areas of expertise that the younger generation has a monopoly over, and if they are the keepers of, if not wisdom, then at least information, then shouldn't they be the ones in power? But that would be to append the system of seniority, which would have made the elders to have the power. So the situation that we find ourselves in is a sort of somewhat complicated one, because um, before wisdom, the traditional wisdom was usually in the minds of the elders, because of the experience, because of their just by having lived a long time, they knew more, they had gone through a lot. So naturally, and they had proven themselves as qualifying for those positions. It was not simply given to them. They had shown their courage, their wisdom, and so on in life. So in the past, traditionally, it was the elders who had the wisdom and subsequently much of the power. But in modern days, the information, the modern information, from computers to to just the general culture, the general culture is still, and the looking, the outlook for the future, that is information that is mostly in the minds of young people. There's some things that the elders might not really be able to tackle. So right now, the power has sort of shifted from the wisdom of the old to the information and data systems of the younger generation. And so that shift in information has not necessarily translated into a shift of power. So you still have people who still are in power, but they're out of touch, not just with the people who are increasingly, they are very young, and the population of Africa, I can't remember, they say three quarters, I don't know how that true, but yeah, they say that a significant population of Africa is young people. So you have these young people, and you have, in some cases, the people at the top are still, or the people in, even within the family, not even in a political sense, but even within, smaller structures, you still see that it's the older people who are still in charge and who are still in power, and yet for the people who are being the majority of the people are the young people. So that power dynamic has not really shifted, and that's one of the traditions that we have to examine. Do we need to change also the way that we look at power, at the sharing of power, and who is qualified to hold it? Yeah, so we have to ask ourselves that as well. Sister Casida says elderly people at times can get stuck in time, and they can get stuck in the past, and they're stuck not growing. Yeah, that's one of the dangers of that, and especially in an increasingly future oriented world, where people are looking to the future. People are looking 50, 60, 100 years into the, I don't know if we had this concept of future, I know that we had predictions, we had prophecies and so on, um, but I don't know if we planned for the future. Like we said, okay, so in 20 years we'll be doing this, that. I'm not saying we didn't, it's one of those things that I'm not making assumptions, but it's just to question whether we did have a planning time, and maybe that's why we relied so much on tradition, because it was based both in the past and in the present. But in any case, yeah, some people who are still stuck in time, and that's a natural thing as well, because you have to have people who are standing in different parts of time. So you'll have people who are looking back, because even if you look to the future, it's not to say that the past is totally to be disregarded. Even in Western tradition, they still have a reverence for the past. It's simply the way that they approach it is maybe different. I think for them, they want to keep the past static. They want it to be one way. But for us, even the past can always be changing. That's the danger of the direct transmission, is that even the past can change. It's not written down, so it has to be kept up by the people. So when we look at the past, yes, we can be stuck in time, but we also have to start looking to the future. What are some of the elements of our tradition and culture that we can base on and we can work on to look to the future, to use for the future? So I said, with the imbalance of power and information right now, I think that's going to be one of the things that we'll have to solve. That should power be in the hands of the young, who have the information, but not sometimes not maybe the experience, and the long how do you say it, when you look back in retrospect? Yes, you don't have the retrospection, or do you have it in the hands of the elders, who have the wisdom, but they might not be in touch with present developments. They might not be technologically or globally in touch. So you have to see um, where the information lies, where it's supposed to be where it's supposed to be distributed, and how it's supposed to be executed. Okay, so the stack in time. Um, Africa needs to take down the walls, borders, and come together as one, with two languages, maybe Swahili and English grow together. Well, consider this is one of also the modern ideas too, because like I was saying, traditionally, people, and when you passed down knowledge, it was passed from person to person. So even the idea of language was a tribal thing. Now there were lingua francas. There were people were able to communicate. Sometimes if you knew somebody's other language, or if your languages were similar enough for you to speak. But in that case, traditionally, language was actually a way of separating people, not uniting them. So different tribes had different languages, and sometimes they could not easily understand each other. And so the idea of having one language for all, that's also a modern and not a traditional African practice, I would say, because for most people, it wasn't all of us having one language. It was all of us having different languages. So yeah, these are some aspects of tradition that we also have to look at. Was this good for us, to have different languages, or should we have worked together to try to unify the languages? But with the unification, do we then give up, the languages, the tribal languages, or do we add on top of that? So, mhm. Oh, only saying, who say the young or old have wisdom? Well, that's just the general perception, generally, and obviously, in present days, you cannot generalize things, just like with common sense. But traditionally, the older you got, the more experience you had, and the more those experiences were supposed to increase your knowledge and your skills and so on. So when you got to a certain age, you're supposed to be wise in the ways of the world. So you accumulated enough knowledge, information, and social relations, not just knowledge and information. That was not enough. It was also, you had established your place in society. So in having all those dealings, all that, experience, that was supposed to increase your wisdom and your knowledge as well as your wisdom. So yeah, it was assumed that somebody who was older, was who had gone through more of life's experiences, was supposed to have wisdom, because that's what, you're supposed to learn from your experiences. And the young people are supposed to have ambition. They're supposed to have drive. They're supposed to, to be, the strength of the community. So yeah, they still have the out. It's like the young people are looking out or forward, and the older people are looking backwards. Not backwards in a bad way, but they're building upon something, whereas other people, the young people, are looking to build. So that's all it meant with the wisdom. Wisdom was simply an accumulation of life experiences. So the more experiences you had, the wiser you were supposed to be. And that was progressive through your life as well. The more experiences you had, you're supposed to be wiser today than you were, you know 5-10 years ago. So that was all wisdom was. And then when you get to a certain age, then you become wiser and wiser. um you said, but who brought in the different languages? um well, okay, so the tribal languages were already there, and they were split. Well, some were together, some were split. You have to remember that there was a lot of migration in Africa. So there were people who could move from place to place. They would interact with other people, they would intermarry. So languages would change based on, simply the migrations and the movements of people. And when um yeah, so when people encountered each other, for example, if you came from the same place, but you encounter a different group of people, your language might change slightly based on that. And so eventually, after a long time, hundreds and hundreds of years, even though the language are still similar, because of the different experiences, they become a little bit different. And so unless you speak both well, which some people did, people who lived in the same area usually spoke each other's languages, but it was still different. It was still a separation. So yeah, Africa was naturally divided into tribal languages. That is not was not necessarily you know separation divisive. It was separation, but it was not divisive, because everyone understood that if somebody is not from your tribe, they probably have different customs and cultures and practices. And unless they encountered you, most of the time people just leave each other alone. The main way of interacting was usually either by marriage or just by isolation. And so we had there were different languages, but they were not necessarily in conflict with each other. Now, when the Europeans and when other languages came in, then people who were speaking, let's say, English as their language, like what is happening, what is right now. So you can be an English speaking African or a French speaking African. Um, there's also Portuguese in is it Mozambique? Yeah, Mozambique and Angola. And then there's only one country in Africa that speaks Spanish, and I heard about it all recently. Well, I knew about it sort of, but I just heard a bit more about it. But Equatorial Guinea, they're the only country in Africa that speaks Spanish. So in that terms, when the languages become official, when they're not your tribal language, and you have to use these official languages to to communicate or to have a society, then yes, it becomes very divisive. If you're using somebody else's language and somebody else is using a different language, yeah, it has created quite a miscommunication between Africans. and it has cut us off from our French brothers and sisters, for quite some time. So because of that language barrier, it's difficult for people to relate to each other. Sometimes, people feel isolated, or people feel grouped in certain with certain people that they might not necessarily have too much in common with. But because you speak the same language, like now, we can only speak these languages now because we were all colonized by the same language speakers. So we're all speaking English now because we were all colonized by the English to some, extent, whether it's American or whatever, it was still, English. So yeah, that's how that's how language divides. But it doesn't need to say, separation is not necessarily bad, but division usually is. So when you have divisions, then it creates this conflict. But when it's just separation, it's simply people speaking their own languages. Um you don't take it as a reason to fight just because somebody doesn't speak your language. But most people, like I said, they learned each other's languages and they learned to communicate that way. Um, yes, everything that they brought in now, that they're gone, education should be shifted, everything they create. Yeah, there needs to be a major shift in society, in the way that we look at things. But you see, that's where the conundrum lies, is that when you want to shift things, do you want to shift them back to where they were? Did this, because where they were is also was also part of that was destroyed, part of that was forgotten, part of that was modified, and a lot of it was incorporated into the new world. So just due to to the modernization, for example, there was a discussion at one point, at the point of independence of most of the African countries in the 60s, whether they should go back to the traditional systems, or whether they should keep the borders. And the discussions were valid on both sides. Some people said, no, we didn't create these borders, we should go back to how we used to rule ourselves. And for some people, they said, well, we didn't create them, but eventually we had to unite with people within those borders and fight together. So in that fight, we became a nation and a community, not through somebody else's definition, but through our own fight for our independence, for our freedom. So that fight in itself created that brotherhood in the nation. So and and also, they would say that, once the nations are created, we're now living in a nation state global system, that people nations relate to nations, they don't relate to tribes and so on. So even if you wanted to go back to the old systems, it would be nearly impossible to do so in the new global system. So for those and many reasons, it was difficult to go back to the old. And that's where you have to look at how much of the traditions can you really incorporate into your present, and how much of that is really useful for your future. So those were the questions that that plagued the founders of the new republics. These are the questions that they had to wrestle with, and also that we have to also contend with now, because we're also looking at the possible decline of a lot of our cultural aspects, not just in the practice, but also in the speech, in communication. There are some languages with fewer and fewer speakers. There are some traditions that are dying out with the passing of the last generation. And so, do we want to revive these traditions, or are we happy to see them go? Those are some of the things that we have to look at, and what is most beneficial for the youth. um You said when you went to Rwanda. Oh, you went to Rwanda as well. Okay, okay. They spoke a totally different language, so it was very hard to communicate. And Rwanda, some knew English, but some did not. Yeah, so those are one of the ways that language can both unite people and it can also divide them. It can also cause people to have different divisions based on your past experiences. So some people are going to be able to, you know, and Cameroon also has that issue because they too are colonized by two countries. I think I can't remember if it was the French first or it was the British. But in any case, Cameroon is like Canada. They have both the French and the British and the English influence. So, if you want to come up, Kasida, or anyone else, you're more than welcome to. Today was just today was just a discussion, an open discussion. So they had in some countries they have this conflict of language where some places they were more Anglo-sized and some places they were more Frenchified, and so people also want to hold on to what they are used to. So simple as, similarly with Equatorial Guinea, they are the only Spanish-speaking country in Africa, and that almost alienates them from the rest of the African countries because they can't understand the rest of the countries of the African countries, and the rest of us cannot understand them. And so they're almost like in this linguistic desert because they can't communicate with anybody outside of their borders, and they almost have to rely on Spain to have international relationships. So not that they can't, obviously, there's translations and all of this stuff. So I'm sure they have communication and trade and so on uh, with their neighbors, but it just puts them um, in a very isolating position. So that's one of the ways. But in the old days, in the tribal days, they would probably have had less issues because they would be speaking the language, the tribal language of their neighbors, and with enough inter exchange, they would be able to communicate. It wouldn't be being fluent, but it would still be possible. Communication would still be possible. Whereas the differences between the English speakers and say the French speakers is so great that I think the only way that we can really bridge that gap is through music. Music is the only way in Africa that you can start to understand or appreciate the culture of other people. So we listen to music. I'm sure the French-speaking part of Africa listen to English music, and the same with us to different degrees. For example, the Congolese people, DRC and Congo Kinshasa and the Congo Brazza, they have this great tradition of music. They've always been known for that, from Lingala, Makossa, and all that. So they have always been known for not just singing in the language, but they do. I think they sing in French as well, a little bit. I don't know how much of it they mix in, but they sing in their language and they travel all over Africa. People were going to concerts by all these French African musicians, and people could not speak a word. They could not speak a word, even to, well, you say simple sentences and so on, but you cannot even express to them how much the music means to you because of that, because of that whole language barrier. But even so, it did not diminish the the cultural connection with them. So that African part of it was still intact, even though that language aspect was a barrier. And that's also one of the reasons that African countries really rallied behind each other during the independence movement. They helped each other not just by sending people, but also by encouragement, by yeah, and also um, just by the fact that we had similar struggles, and we knew what people are going through. So Africans have sometimes we focus so much on the fighting and all that, but we also have to remember that there have been times when we also supported each other, when we showed that brotherhood, that Africanness with each other, when we helped those who are in pain or suffering. So Africans have been also have a love for each other, which they should show more, but it's not completely absent. So language is practicing traditional language. I don't think that it will necessarily cause division. I think that having a common language is the modern way to go. I think that you can still have your traditional languages, you can still have your tribal languages, but we can also have, and this is why I still I always admire Tanzania, because they chose an African language. Yes, it has influences from other places, admittedly, but they chose an African language that people could speak, and that went a long way in breaking down those barriers. Breaking down those barriers between tribes. Before, it was not necessary for tribes to have the same language. They could trade, or they could interact for as much as was comfortable, or learn each other's languages when it was necessary. But increasingly, uniformity is key. So what Tanzania did with the language was very powerful, because it unified people, and it created connections between people, and it broke down a lot of barriers because people were finally able to communicate with each other. And I think a lot of East African countries are also seeing the value of a unified language. And a unified language that sounds something like the language that you usually speak, not something that is totally foreign to the ear with its French or English. So yeah, that's the impact of tradition. That's the importance of tradition, which says that the principle that everybody should be taken care of, and that we should have respect for each other. And language is a great way of achieving that. Language is a great way of unifying people, of getting people together. And it's been a unifying factor in Africa, especially when it comes to Kiswahili. But it's also been, unfortunately, a divisive one when it came to these other languages, the official languages, the ones that we use for governments and for official communication in schools. So in a way, it was some of those cultures we have to re-examine. We have to re-examine how we practice them. um, that tribal aspect of transmitting even knowledge and information, it used to work in the past when you had more insular control of the tribe, when tradition was passed on in a very um, organized manner, when everyone knew their place in society. But those methods sometimes, even though they're still useful, I think that you shouldn't just get rid of everything, even if you embrace something new. But I think it's still useful to have that in fact, increasingly, it's it's more important for people to have a direct interaction, rather than the more remote ways that we're going. So there was merit to that. There was merit to that information transmission, that you had to be there. When people say you had to be there, you literally had to be there to get that information. But it's impossible, not impossible, but it's improbable now, especially with the pace of modern life, to really be in the same place with everyone at the same time, as we can see from this interaction. So in the modern world, it's not space is not going to be able to be traversed that easily. And so in the modern way, we now have to embrace the modern aspect of remoteness, where you can still do things, but you can still do something at the same time, but not in the same space. So I would say that for African tradition, the spatial aspect of it was most important, that you had to be in the presence of someone, or to receive that information. But I think that the modern time is, and sorry to to for the pun, but in modern times, time is more important than space. The being able to reach people in time or beyond time, nowadays with recordings and so on, that aspect of modern life has trumped over our African cultural practice of space, which is directly being in the presence of somebody and transmitting knowledge that way. But in a way of trying to take advantage of both, I think that our next step should be to to digitize that direct knowledge, to take in that information and and store it and keep it for the next generation, because so much of that knowledge was transmitted from person to person, and it would be a shame if it simply died with the people, when nowadays we have methods of preserving it. So I think that before we even ask whether the relevance of traditions, we should start by collecting them. We should start an active process of collecting and compiling our cultural artifacts, not just language, but language, stories, traditions, principles, ideas, concepts, all these things that we had from before. We should start putting them in a form that will be accessible not just now but in the future, because unless we do that, we're going to lose it all. And they say you don't know what you've got until it's gone. But what if you don't know what you had and it was gone before you even knew it? So for some people, they we won't have access to those knowledge, those stories, those experience and information that our ancestors spent. It took them generations upon generations to acquire that knowledge and information and practice. And unfortunately, all that can be, you know, can go in a generation or two or three. So I think for our duty as Africans everywhere is to start accessing that knowledge and then culture as a whole, because you've seen also, and Swahili Nation was also involved in this with the artifacts, with the return the artwork, the traditional symbols, the masks, the statues. There's a lot of African art in European museums. We took in a lot of, we took in their culture, we took in their language and so on. But at the same time, they also stole our culture. They stole our culture. They stole our, information. They took away a lot from us. So much of our historical and traditional culture is still held in outside of Africa, is still held in mostly European museum, the British Museum, and so on. So even that aspect of it, we still have to go and access and reacquire that culture, because we don't know what those symbols meant. These are areas that we should study, whether we adopt them or not. We should be the ones who are studying our culture, our languages, our traditions and experiences and so on, not leaving it up to other people to do so. But even in doing that, we also have to study and say, why they're still useful and necessary. Information for the sake of information is wonderful and great, but you should really use it to do something to further your present, to make your life better, or to understand. And even if you don't do something with it, people think that knowledge has to be something that you create something with it, or if it's not tangible, it's not useful. But sometimes it's also good to have knowledge as a means of understanding not just yourself in the present, but the reasons of your progression, of how you got there, and what were the influences that made you, who you are. So if we as Africans want to understand ourselves, we we are beholden to to take the past into consideration. We didn't just appear out of the imagination of a European. We were actually here, and we in our own minds before anyone did. So we have to look at ourselves and see how did we see ourselves in the past, and how does that even relate to us now? What was our identity? What was our practice? How did we, you know, how did we relate to each other? So those are some of those cultural practices. Sometimes people think that tradition is just, you know it's just spirituality, which it is. It has a lot to do with that. It's but it's also society is also a tradition. In fact, for the most part, Africans had a lot of rules regarding, community. It was not just this feel good thing that, we're all one people, everybody should. There were rules about, how to conduct yourself in front of, you know, different groups of people, whether it was your peers, people who were younger than you, your elders, married women, unmarried women, children. There were different levels of society. And so all these rules one had to slowly acquire as you grew, and you learned through through stories, through riddles, through wisdom, but you also learned through admonishments, through punishment, and you also learned just by observing other people, by seeing how other people relate, and copying what they were doing, or learning to do something based on what somebody else was doing. So their direct transmission of knowledge fostered this communal feeling, because you needed other people in order to define yourself. You needed other people in order to know how to behave, um, even towards them. There were rules about how to talk to different people, how to be respectful, and also how to, if you're someone in authority, how to command authority. So there were many aspects of tradition. And when we look at the future, is to say that, who were we, um, what did we become, and how are we also affected by the change in this way of living. If you've done something for a very long time, even if you have no direct knowledge of it, because increasingly, for example, a lot of Africans are living in the cities, and they might not have the connection that they had with the older generations, and some things are just going to be lost just in time. They say lost in translation, that's in communication, but some things are also just going to be lost in terms of time, the passage of time. So this generation might not have the same pool of knowledge and information as the previous one. And so they might have different referential points, but there's still a string that ties them together. There's still something that unites people, even throughout time. And even if we live in the modern ways, we're still affected by what happened before to our immediate family, to our ancestors, and to our ancestors, and however far back it goes, people are still affected. That's where they come up with the whole meme. It was like a combination of gene and memory. It's like a gene memory. People still have. That's why it's so easy for people to learn these skills. And it's not just people. It's also in animals and so on. Whereas birds, every generation of birds, migratory birds, know exactly where to go to, which season to live, where to eat, where to find food, and so on. And they fly thousands. Some of them fly from one continent to another, but they still know where they're going. they use, they're magnetic. I'm sure they use, weather patterns and guidelines. But in any case, they it's a genetic memory, something that they've been doing for a long time, where they just do it automatically. So even us, there are things that we simply do, we might not understand the reasons why we do them, but they are probably steeped deep into our collective consciousness. And we might not have immediate access to it, but it's always there in our subconscious or our unconscious. I don't know which one is which, but in any case, it comes with wisdom. It comes with experiences, and that's why, if you look at, even the African civilization, Africa as we know it, we are young as countries, but we are old as a people. So we're in this, this um, very awkward stage where we're both young and old at the same time. We're both, new to this, but at the same time, we've been doing it for a long time. And merging the two, yeah, it's going to be challenging. It's going to be challenging. But I think the power is still in the young people, yes, but in the young people, in taking not just control of the present, but also in the past. There's a lot that, that young people can take inspiration from, even when we look at it, tradition. If you look at, where we have been and so on. So I would say that in terms of tradition, let us digitize tradition. Let's take tradition and bring it into the modern era, and see what it can do for us as Africans and for Africans throughout the world. Because there are people who, where, sometimes they might not see the usefulness of what we believed in, or what we practice and so on. And some people might look at it as, maybe um, not being in line with modern, um, with modern ideas of, so it's sort of like modesty and so on. But so there were some things that we really didn't need. There were some things that we were simply, there's some things that we didn't have, it's true, but there were a lot of things that we didn't need. And, there are things that we had in the past that maybe we can make use of now. I think that one of the most powerful ones is the idea of community, the idea that everyone in society should, to some extent, has both a duty to work for others, and, an expectation for others to support him when he cannot, but only when he cannot, not at all times, not to take advantage. Okay, well, yeah, that was really it for me today. I've actually gone far, far longer than I thought I would. That was one long soliloquy. So, well, I put the link up there. I don't think anybody's going to be coming up today. I know it was one of those random, like, just unexpected things, but it was good to connect with everyone. It was good to have this conversation. I should say, oh, no, 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 but I do appreciate. Yes, I'm being this short because I can't, talk to myself for hours. Oh, okay. Chelsea just hopped on right now, just when I'm about to you know to leave. Okay, Wanda Chelsea. What's up? Because it's the morning for me, and I just woke up. How are you doing, Sasa?
Hello. Yeah, poa, niko poa sana. Just
You're speaking.
listening to. I've been listening. People are listening. Didn't
Why
want to
can't I hear
interrupt
you?
you.
Is it me? Hold on. Okay, say something.
Can you hear me?
Okay, now I can. Now I can. Good. Yes, you're good.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I was just listening. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Nah, you interrupt, interrupt.
Nah, you're going on. So I wanted to learn. So you're just listening on your perspective on African tradition. And I actually came here just to ask a question.
Mhm.
What do you what's in an African name? What do you see the importance of an African name or something like that?
The important. Are you saying like identifying with your African name, identifying as an African?
Yeah. It's also part of African traditions, right? So like, I just wanted to see
No,
your
actually, that
opinion.
one is not. Like I was saying, telling Casida with the idea of a national um, language, that is also not that is a modern idea, not so much of an African one. So there are some things that we can still incorporate. They're not necessarily African, but they're not, against being African. So like with having one language for everyone, that was not necessarily an African tradition. We used to have tribal languages where everybody pretty much spoke their language. So, but I still support the idea of having a more universalized African language. Like, yeah, so it's not an African tradition, but it would be good for Africans as a people. So even
But okay,
as
okay. I
Africans,
think
was not.
I don't know. I think I may disagree that it's not an African tradition because languages. Okay, before there were African nations. The tribes were practically African nations, right? So they used to speak one language
Mm, no, no,
as a
no, no, no,
nation.
no. For me, the main difference, and there are many, but in terms of language, the difference between a nation and a tribe is that a tribe is unified by language. A nation is unified by different tribes. You can be in a nation and people can have different languages, but it's still one nation. But a tribe, the one of the most specific things is that it's united by, it's monolingual, whereas a nation can be a nation of many languages.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Also, I don't know. I think a nation is also unified by languages. One language. I think if you look at the nations that don't have same languages, they tend to have wars and to have like some civil unrest. Good example is Cameroon. It has two different national languages. You know.
Yeah, I said I mentioned Cameroon earlier. Yeah, you can have one unifying language, but even with that unifying language, that's why you can have an official language, you can have a unofficial, informal, and you can have different languages within one. You can have, a formal language where you say, okay, so we're all going to speak one language, but a nation can accommodate several different languages, even if it has one unifying one. But a tribe, for the most part, it needs one language. So having, one language for all the tribes, that was not a traditional, African practice, but it's a practice that modern Africans can take because of the situation that we are in.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to again. I'm going to disagree again because like I know I like this the fact that like I think Africans use. Then how did Africans talk to each other? How do they trade with each other if they didn't have common languages? Did they just learn to both languages? Or I think
Yeah, I
if you look
think
at
that's how it worked. But go ahead.
yeah, okay, if you look at a good example is the look at central Kenya, Mount Kenya region. We have the Kikuyu and we have the Meru and the Embu, and I don't know if is there another tribe. Okay, yeah, it's the Embu, Kikuyu, and the Meru, right?
Hmm.
So for those three tribes, they are those are three different tribes by the way, but they do have a similar language,
Yes.
more or less. There maybe there's a difference here and there, but but if and
Yes.
even you can look at the Bantu languages also, they seem to have those are just Bantu tribes, but you can just look at Bantu languages, they seem to be a little bit similar.
Hmm.
So I'm not saying that okay, I am saying that language as a unifying factor of people. I think that is also that's just I don't even think it's just African. I think it's just human nature to be unified by common language. But as a nation, I think people when you say I had this argument I don't know if I were with you in the last week's Bitterman
Probably,
podcast.
probably.
Yeah,
Yeah, probably.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So in the Bitterman's podcast, like
Yes.
my brother is it Koku?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to mispronounce the name,
Yes.
but yeah, he was talking about what is being, you know, what is this? Is this abortion? Abortion, the practice of abortion. Is
Mm-hmm.
abortion African? You know, and I used to say and I've now realized that I was a little bit wrong when I said abortion is not is an African thing. I was wrong because I realized that what's being African is not what we were doing 200 years ago, or 300 years ago, or even 100 years ago, even 50 years ago. I
Mm-hmm.
think being African is something that constantly changes, and is every day being African might even mean something different. So I was just looking at the perspective of before that. Oh yeah, we used to do a lot of tribes in Africa used to do abortion. That was, in fact, we used to do much worse. You know, for those who know, you know that the things we used to do with the twins. If you know, you know, right?
Mm-hmm.
but but I think now abortion is not African because
Well, that's what I was saying earlier about tradition. Is this people seem to think that tradition is this something that is set in stone. While it is conservative, that means that it preserves, but it's not to say that it's dogmatic. What for me actually, the people who have a written system, they're way more dogmatic because they're still relying on something that was written at a time that was a totally different time. So while African tradition, societies were traditional in the way that they kept something that had been going on for a long time, they were also adaptable. So when they encountered new things, they were able to take them in, they were able to incorporate them into their tradition, and they were able to add those to their tradition because even some of these traditions that we talk about, we don't know how long they've gone. That's the beauty of the oral system. It could be 200 years, it could be 2000 years, we don't know, because tradition is in the minds, like I was saying, it's in the minds of the living people. So it's going to be passed on, but the people who are going to pass it on will also add something of theirs to to that tradition. So we're not always in a fixed state of this is what it is. There are fundamental principles, and that's why I say that we were based on principles, not so much letters of the law. So we had guiding principles, but they're not written down. So every generation can to some with some limits, but every generation can redefine those in their own terms, and in the ways that they're faced with the system. So yeah, there's some things that were traditional, but we have to modify them, or there's some that are traditional and are still relevant today. So yeah, I say that we were very adaptable, and even up to the present, we take things, we make them, we make them ours in a way. We still keep what is ours, but we take other things and then we make them, we Africanize even the things that we encounter anew. But yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So also back to my original question. I think the pro-black perspective has highlighted it that what's the relevance of an African name? Or do you think, or is it irrelevant? What do you think?
Oh, oh, okay. For me, I thought you were going to say something about it. Well, for me, I think it's very relevant. It's one of those aspects of tradition that we should still keep. That's also that's part of your identity. That's part of you still having your link to tradition. The way that Africans have done it, they've taken both. They have their traditional name, and then they have their the modern name. So Africans par excellence, being adaptable. That's what most Africans have done. They still use their traditional names, but they also have their modern names. So I think in terms of our identity, that's a great, that's an important aspect of your identity, your name. So yeah, I'm for it. I think that we should Africanize our names as much as we can. I like the the people I've seen who like have two of the African names. I think that's the coolest thing. Like if you have like a Gitobu Manyara or a Uhuru Kenyatta, yeah, in a way. But yeah, those kinds of names, I think that's the coolest thing when somebody has like all the African names and they're not like a Peter or a Tom or something. Yeah, that's the coolest thing. Unfortunately not everybody, but for the people who can, oh man. So yeah, I think that people should retain the African names as well as their languages, but with language, like I said, you have to show people that that language still has some purpose, that is still useful for something. Because increasingly some people say, well, why do I need to learn my mother tongue when I can communicate easily in English and Kiswahili. So yeah, for those kinds of things, I think that we should boost, we should boost that aspect of traditional culture with the language, because language is a living thing. You need people to keep language alive. So yeah, but other traditions and things, we can always look, and even when we question the tradition, we should also question the modern things that we are embracing. It's not just to say, oh, let's just try to embrace one wholeheartedly. It should always be with a sense of what are the principles that we are working with. If we're going to be traditionalist, is with the principle of, okay, let's say you people should have respect, and then you look into your traditions and see what aspects of that, or people should have freedom, and what aspects of your culture and tradition speak to that. But also in terms of modern ideas, we should also be just as critical of modern ideas as we are of tradition. I think sometimes we are quick to dismiss the past and that which is gone, and we're ready to embrace whatever is new without giving it the critique that it needs. And it's easier to do that with all things, because you have the advantage of retrospection. But even with the limited knowledge of the present, we should still be able to look critically at new ideas, and not just say, oh, it's new, therefore it must be good. So I think that that idea of adapting should be applied to both tradition as well as the present. Hey Maria Antoinette, habari, habari, habari. Good to have you.
Yeah. But I know. I think when it comes to the naming thing, I think Africans. I think most Africans have two African names. We have, then there's for the one English name, and
Hmm.
the one European name, or
Hmm.
is it Christian name? I don't know, whatever they call it,
Yeah.
and the two African names. Or I think that's how most Africans have it, when they have three names, right?
Hmm. Yes, I think it's one European and two African. And increasingly nowadays they have like the family name. We didn't used to have that before, traditionally. Another tradition that we're changing now. But we didn't used to have, for the most part, like a family name, like the father's name is everybody's name, right?
Yeah. That's also something I wanted to ask of, that type of tradition that you're passing down your name to your children.
Right. That's a new one.
Yeah, that's also why do you think
What? Sorry, hello.
well, why do you think that why do you think we didn't do that? Why do you think parents didn't pass down the name to their children?
You know what I think? I think for children, every child had his or her, English is so terrible. Every child had his own, like identity and name and so on. So they were not so much, the child of the father. They were more of, the child of the family. So like they would name the child after either, somebody in the community, or something, when the child was born, or the order, or things like that. So it was not so much, oh, I'm going to stamp my name on, as a father, I'm going to stamp my name on all my children. It was more of, all these children are going to have their different, identities in the community or in the family. So everybody had their own, and then remember, people also had, some people also had names later on. Some people also acquired names, like if they had, a certain characteristic that stood out, they would have names. Some people would even name themselves later on, and things like that. So I think names were both, an aspect of your individual characteristic, and also something that you could change, in your lifetime, depending on, on things. So it was not like just that one. But also it could be that, people didn't know who their father. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, I think for the most part it was more of, the child was not so much, the child of the father, as it was, the child of, the family. Yeah, like, in Kikuyu, they the first child, I think, is named after the grandfather. If it's a boy, the grandfather on the dad's side, and then the second one, the grandfather on the mother's side. Back and forth like that. So it's not so much, you the father. It's, the grandfather in that aspect. And then in some cases, they're named after, somebody who passed, or somebody who was great, or they're named after animals, different things. So I think every child had, its own characteristic, not so much, oh, the child of so and so. But we did have, some people did have, appended to the names, son of somebody, right? Like Arap Moy in, like in Kalenjin, they had that, right? Were all the sons in the family called Arap Moy, or was it just him? Do you know?
Yeah, actually, that's something else I wanted to point out, that okay, there were no family names, but there were community names.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
Like, okay, not one name, but you could tell that this guy's name is from this specific community.
Mm-hmm.
Clan names, even just clan, just by.
Yes. Yes, that one I can say for sure. Yes, there were clan names. There were, you can tell where somebody's from. The people who are named after certain, certain people. So yeah, so let's take a moment to welcome Marie Antoinette. Good to have you in the house. Amani sana dada. Amani and Karibu. You should know all that by now. We have George of Ofodu. I hope I'm saying that right, George. I'm sorry if I'm not. Karibu sana, George. Um, so we have, yeah, Habari Mzuri. FolkTube says some of Africans even started making names of some countries viral. Face green military. Oh, smiley face. They called their child Israel. Yeah, yeah. When it comes to Africans naming their children, Africans are ridiculous. Like, there's people who are called, George Washington, somebody. There are people who call themselves after places. There are people who call themselves. I've had somebody who was called Lewinsky. So yeah, Africans like to.
But there's a reason why they do that, though.
What's that?
That's part of. I don't know if it's still part of Africa, but that's part of African culture. I think it's still part of African culture.
To name children after places and
Even
events.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I don't, So even if you find an African named Washington, you should inquire why he's named Washington. There's probably a story behind it.
There's a story to nearly all African names. I swear, if you guys meet an African, just ask them the story behind the names. Even if it's an English name, most of the time there's a story behind even the English names. Names are very rarely just, randomly given like that. Even if it's just a boring old name like, John. Where does your name come from? He's like, oh, John was this very important man in my village, who helped, our family, blah blah blah. Or somebody, there's always a story behind it. It's very, sometimes, not always. I know I'm not saying always, but most of the time there's a story behind the name. So yeah, Africans really what, to get the visa? No, nobody's looking that far out into the future. I don't think, and I don't know if that will help you much. If you're naming your child now and trying to get a visa. No, I think that Africans just like to name children after events, after places. My child was born during Corona. I don't know how many Corona babies there are now.
Yeah, I guarantee you there are those who are born children. There are those Africans who named their children Corona. I guarantee you that they're probably, if you just, I'm sure it's sort of fine. It's just, this is, like I said, this is African culture. It's always, oh yeah, yeah, because I know right now their children named after. Right now, I guarantee you their children. There's some African. It might not be that much these days because
Yeah,
the
yeah.
colonization agenda has been pushing strong. So, but maybe there are those who have just named their children after the new king of England. I don't know.
Yeah.
What's his name? I've forgotten his name.
Yeah,
George.
Charles. Oh my
Charles.
goodness.
Charles.
I know Diana's and what's the other one's name? Diana. I can't remember who, but yeah, I know Dianas who are named after Princess Diana. I know
Williams.
yes, William.
Henry's.
Oh,
Harry's.
hey, hey.
Yeah, there's a lot of events like that. And I know for sure there is probably thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, Barack Obamas.
Mm. Oh, for sure, for sure. There's so many Obamas out there. It's probably ridiculous by now. Yeah, Africans, the naming thing is very important. It's very important, um, to give a name that has a story, that has a meaning. I don't know why it's not showing up. I see it on the other screen, but it's not showing up. But yes, George Fodum. I'm sure if we asked this name of yours, the story of your name, we'd get along on, but it's okay. FolkTube says, by the way, do you think we're free from? No, of course not. Of course not. But Tezi, what do you think?
Free from colonization. Uh, yeah, we are in the process. I don't think it's something that happens like a switch or something. I think it's like a process, and yeah, I think we are well. A lot of us are well into the process. In fact, the other day I was talking to somebody, and yeah, they just fresh from high school, and they already know about decolonization, and so it was very surprising, really, because they are talking about one.
Are they teaching that in school, or how did he know? He just,
I don't. Okay, I didn't ask where they got that knowledge from.
okay,
I
okay.
should have asked now. I think I don't know. I didn't ask, but the way they were talking about African, like Africa, if the way Africa is exploited, so it's clearly this the colonization is happening. Whether it's whether it's in whether the pace is in the way we want it, I don't know. But I see that we are the process. We are deep into the process of decolonization. That's what I can say. That a lot of Africans are waking up to the reality. So even politicians, even right now, you can see before it was not so. It was so easy to sell out your country before you Africa, but these days, people are aware. It becomes more difficult for even these corrupt or dusty politicians to sell out their country without some political blowback from their own people. So that means that there is a rise in awareness when it comes to neocolonialism.
And that's what we were discussing earlier in terms of the power imbalance. So traditionally, the wisdom was highly prized as a qualification for leadership or influence or whatever. So power was mostly, not entirely, but mostly concentrated in the elders, or the older people in the community. because it was, they were respected for their wisdom, their experience, and so on. And that worked at that time because obviously, the older you are, the more you accumulate knowledge and wisdom, and that just makes sense. But in the modern times that we live in, what is more important is the accumulation of information, being on the technological forefront, and being able to meet the challenges of the new world, which are way different than what the previous generation was facing. So in terms of that, the young people who are in fact the majority of the population, but they are more equipped to face the challenges of the future, and they have more of that information and knowledge than the generation before them. But unfortunately, the power is still in the hands of mostly the oldest, not the elders particularly, but the older people. So you find people who have power, but they don't really have the information, or I'm not saying that they don't know what is going on, but they might not be as quick to react or to know how to react about it as somebody who's maybe on the forefront of things. So at this time, I think that there's a power imbalance between the people who have the information, which is the young people, and the people who have the power, which is the older people. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think, okay, I don't know if there is a power imbalance because I feel like maybe, yeah, Africa is not homogeneous. Okay, that's what, first of all. I think Africa, there are African countries where there is no power imbalance, right? The young people have begun taking leadership. We have even the president of Ethiopia is like under 50, right? How is he, son? I don't know. He's in his 40s?
Yes,
Uh,
yes, he's part of the young generation. I
yeah,
would
yeah. So,
And
you know,
who else? Which other country? Hmm. Yeah, yeah, okay. So that's the one that we can say. Yeah. And go ahead.
yeah, so they're the president. Although a lot, big majority of African leaders are very old, and yeah, we need to change this because I just checked out. Barack Obama right now is 61 years old. Like, like,
What? What?
yeah,
He is 60.
yeah, he's 60 now.
Whoa.
Like,
Wow.
they are African leaders. Yeah, yeah. He's like, imagine. So just look how young he was when he was right. Yeah,
Wow. Okay. Okay.
when he
Yeah.
when he was when he was running for president almost almost 17 years ago.
Yeah.
Like,
But see how crazy also even America has gone. They've gone back to, to the old heads. Like they went from, because Clinton, even Bill Clinton, when he was in office, I think he was also in his 40s when he was in office. So he was one of the young presidents. But now they're going for the 70-year-olds. But the difference, at least with them, is this: that even if they're old, they haven't been in power for years and years. They're old. They're going to be there from when they're 76 until they're 80, and then retire. But for us, it's old people who've been in power for too long. That's a problem. If it was just a rotation of old people, it wouldn't be quite as bad. But for us, it's these old people who are still in power for a really, really long time. And do you know how out of touch these people are? Paul Biya, do you think he even understands what the people are going through right now? What's those people in Angola? Yeah, completely out of touch. You look at Museveni, for all his blaster, that guy has been there for 27 years. No matter how good of a leader you are, I mean, come on. You have to give other people a chance to try something different. You can't be, the one with all the answers.
yeah, yeah. Museveni is like a thorn in East African unity. Like, I don't like that guy. Yeah, he's like a thorn. Man. He's like, the way he makes decisions. It's like, oh my god, bro. Like, this country is not your village. It's not your compound. Hey, it's like, oh yeah, that guy. literally he makes not even doesn't look at statistics or facts or anything. He just makes decisions from
Actually, I
personal
think he looked at the whole country as his his
his
yard.
compound.
Yeah.
You guys, everybody's just squatting in his compound. It's just
What are they doing over there now?
like
Why are they disturbing my sleep?
uh, you know, literally he makes even big international deals. Like the what? Look at the pipeline deal with the oil, right? Like right
Yeah.
now they have oil, right?
Mm-hmm.
So literally he made that decision, and if he was asked why, it's like, oh yeah, yeah, it's because oh, no, he
He
liked
doesn't
somebody.
care.
Like literally, and he's saying he's not even hiding. I don't know who he liked. He liked somebody, and he made a huge $1 billion international deal because of that. Now you see the deal is on its knees. It's not because it was not feasible from day one, but
Mm-hmm.
because but not even. And the problem is, this is not just a problem unique to Uganda. Although the Uganda, why? Because Uganda, because Museveni has been there for like decades. If not 3 decades or now or something. Is it pushing 30 years? I think. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, I think it's about 27, 30 years.
I think he's reached 30. But it's not that because I think because he's been in power, he's becoming more open and less threatened by anything. So he can say things. But I feel like this happens also in just even Kenya, where deals are not
Yep.
they are illogical, but because somebody has misinterpreted power. Although I feel what I like about democracy, and I know there are those Africans, many by the who are not pro democracy, who feel democracy is Western what is a Western tool to control. Which, by the way, if you look at it, sometimes it is right because they're
Yeah.
you know look, the countries that are really fighting the West are not democracies. The Chinas, the Russias. Yeah, I think Western capital loves to have a leader that they can replace. So that's one of the disadvantages of democracy. Although I'm not. Also there's this fetishization of monarchy when they talk about Pan-Africanism.
Yes.
I've seen guys brag, but how many kings did the East Africa have? West Africa, we had many kings, and I was like, yeah, but how do you know living in those kingdoms was a good thing? That it was like heaven. I don't think it was heaven. I don't think living in a kingdom, especially during that time, was uh, was paradise. I feel like I just heard about this queen. The queen that made that guy sit on. Who was, I don't know what's her name. I've forgotten even the tribe. It was an Angolan tribe. That
Yes, I know her. She's very famous.
Yeah, she made that guy a man sit down, squat or bend over
Yes,
and
but
become stool.
Mwangu wa Makeri also did that. The Kikuyu matriarch, the original. Yeah, she would also do that.
Yeah, I don't, I don't know that if that's true though. Because I don't think that's true. I don't
Okay. Oh,
because
oh,
Kikuyu culture had
no,
no
but that was before the
had
men
no
revolted. Remember that whole
what
story? That was
before.
before the men revolted. Queen Zinga.
Oh,
Yeah, Queen Zinga, that's her
oh,
name. Yeah, but
oh.
remember that story? Yeah,
Okay,
they
okay, yeah. Before, okay, 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 yeah, yeah, okay. That's part of yeah. Okay, I will take that. But you see, they revolted though. So as you can see, that Queen Zinga, do you know the things she did to men?
no.
Like she made men fight to the death,
Oh,
so
that's
that
not
they
nice.
and then the winner would mate with her.
Okay, so she made sure, that they could fight.
Yeah, yeah, that was, yeah, yeah, yeah. She was such a good queen, right? Look at that. If it
Hey,
was a man who did that to women, I
maybe that was
guarantee
just
you,
a vision. I'm not questioning.
if it was opposite, and people are like, yeah, queen, that's how you should, go. People are thumbs up, like, yeah, that's how woman power, feminism. But if it was a man who did that, imagine a man doing that, like, women doing that to women, like it was, yeah.
Yeah, so she
Yeah, it would have been a cast. It will be like a shame in African history. But
me I would say this. She doesn't need to kill, fight to the death. Just have them fight it out, and whoever wins,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
takes.
but that's what happens when with power. With power corrupts. So she said it was to the death. It was
Hey,
so that's so so
that's
this is
my only problem with that, the death part.
no,
The other
yeah,
part,
no, 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 no.
hey.
It's a good indicator of what type of ruler she was. So that's what I'm saying. It was like it's just a good indicator what type of ruler she was, and I feel like people, I wish this is one of the important. I know you said that writing was not the advantage is not to have writings, but I wish also
No,
that,
I actually say that we should be digitizing our traditions.
yeah, yeah,
When
yeah,
we
no, no,
didn't.
no, yeah, okay, yeah, yeah, I've said, yeah, I had that part, but there was also a part where you say that one of the advantages of not
Yes, yes, I did
writing
say
was
that.
that we could be flexible and
Yes.
and
Hmm.
stuff like that. So I think this is one of the disadvantages of not, like, we will at least, this glorification of African monarchies. I wish we had like written first-hand experience, or maybe even second-hand, of people who actually lived under these monarchies, and what they thought, what were their views of these monarchies, because a lot of African monarchies didn't survive anyway. And a good and a good example of is the Kikuyu, right? The ones that they revolted because when the women were in charge. I have heard of that story, by the way.
Yep.
But Kikuyu is still a matriarchy even today. I don't understand how they revolted and the women, and then they still maintain the matriarchy. But the way they revolted and the women became in charge, they revolted the female rule. That means that's a good indication that monarchies are not paradises to live in. Usually, they are just oppressive in nature.
Yeah, that could be. That could be. I mean, they had more of them in the West than in the East. So, hey,
Yeah, you see, and I actually read about. I've been actually been reading about East African traditions that are not monarchies. And
mhm.
still how they used to rule themselves and stuff like that. And I read about the Luo, how they used time based. What is it? Time based, like how time determined, how decisions were determined by time. Like I don't know if it was
Really?
like a written constitution or just time. Yeah, yeah. Like from your birth. So, even from birth, you're named after the time, and from birth to just from the beginning, time is the most important factor. Like the day and the time the time of the day you are born, and then maybe the events of that month or that year or that season. Then
So
from
they
that
had
also,
a time-based culture.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The culture was, yeah. That's why there were no ruling elite. The ruler was time. Like from the
Wow,
time, yeah,
that's
like,
interesting. Can you send that to me?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Also, like the role of a woman and the role of a man, all of them was time based. Like the
Wow.
first wife,
Okay,
when
that we might have to do a new one on that one. I'll read about it. But in the meantime, let's welcome Oni. Oni,
Yeah, yeah.
karibu.
No, I'm joking. Yeah, I was just wondering why brother was hating on Maton. Why are you hating on Maton? No, I mean the thing that we have to realize when we're analyzing or even criticizing the past is that it was a different time period, and by different time period I mean you know, particularly if we're talking about Nzinga, you know, she's existing in a time of like the initial European invasion. You know, like even now we're kind of complaining about, you know, how the Europeans are, but they're really lax compared to what they once were. And so you would have you know, like you would have cities and villages that were mowed down by machine guns, you know. So, you know, all those villages that we tend to, you know, like when we talk about traditional Africa, we're talking about, you know, sometimes we talk about those villages and the village life and the community life and all that kind of stuff. So imagine that life that we're familiar with, you know, those small villages, those small whatever, and just imagine Europeans coming, you know, in the middle of the night, and just firing machine guns on these people and burning them, and then carting them away into, uh, you know, into perpetual servitude or perpetual death, depending on what it was. And then people all over the continent just running and fleeing from this sort of tragedy. And the only people who are keeping these people safe are those people who are organizing to fight against the Europeans, you know, one of which was Nzinga. And she has to decide, even among, you know, her people who are now probably living in much worser conditions, you know, who gets to eat, who gets to mate, who gets to you know, continue in that sort of society. And so we have to look at, when we look at the past, we have to look at the context in which people are making these decisions, in which people are ruling or are running over or running people. Because, you know, if we don't do that, we're going to miss out on, you know, the reality that what Europeans did when they came to Africa was was actually much more diabolical than, well, you know, these two people, these two grown men, you know, fighting and one of them killing the other one, you know, compared to, because I think that there are some estimates that, you know, we don't really talk about it enough, but there's some estimates that 2/3 of Africa was wiped out, and not just 2/3 of Africa, obviously, like 99% of America was wiped out, and 99% of Australia was wiped out. You know, so these Europeans were really on a genocidal mission. You know, they were really killing people, and they were probably going to depopulate the entirety of Africa, if not for not just the size of Africa, because America is pretty big too, but they wiped out the Americans. But also for the resistance that we put up, and that resistance did not always look pretty, but it was a necessary thing for us to have survived. You know, unlike the Native Americans and the Australians.
Yeah, Tezzy.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I agree with you, my brother, that those were difficult times, but you know, it was the whole. Okay, I don't know if is the claiming that West Africa had it worse than East Africa?
Hey,
Is
sorry,
that
did somebody say that?
yeah?
No, I said Africa. I never mentioned West or East. What I'm saying is that these Europeans came and they were very willing to wipe out the entire continent. You know, and the only thing that stops them from wiping out the entire continent are resistance movements. You know, because again, they did wipe out the Native Americans and they did wipe out the Australians. It's not a question of whether it's not a question of what was, like, what was their goal, like what they would have done had people not resisted. You know, um I think when it comes to like when it comes to Africa, I don't really divide east and west or north or south. What we understand is that there are invaders, there are populations that invade the continent, and if there's no resistance to that invasion, the invaders continue to spread. So you know, with East Africa, you had the Arabs, obviously, but the Arabs actually took like went to North Africa and obviously cleared out North Africa, and then there was a resistance in North Africa that pushed them up into Europe. But realistically, they not going to say they cleared out Europe, but they took over Europe for a long time, the Arabs. And then not just that, but they also like I said, like I mean, the Arabs may not be on a genocidal mission like the Europeans are, but the Europeans coming into if we want to specify Western Africa, basically, yeah, the Europeans came in and they did have a mission, and they eventually did come into Eastern Africa, obviously, because we're all speaking English here, right? But by then it was a different agenda. You know, it was let's use the resources in Africa versus let's take over, like let's take let's steal the population. You know, so it by that point it was a different agenda. And I'm not to say that, and I don't think I've mentioned which one was better. I don't, because again it really was Europe against Africa. It wasn't really Europe against Western Africa, because like nobody thinks it was just Europe against Western Africa. I don't know. Where do you get that impression that I said Western Africa?
Oh, yeah, okay. I was because Queen. We're talking about Queen Zinga, and we were comparing African monarchies to cultures that didn't have monarchies, right? They did, like I told you, the Luo people. They were determined. They were ruled by time, basically. Like a woman, like the first wife. Nobody could harvest without the first wife. Was the first person to start the harvest. So without her, there would be no harvest. So, and even there is actually a recorded case where the first wife punished the man of the boma. I don't know, the man of the house. I don't know. There were no houses. I don't know what they call the leader of the man of the boma. He was punished by the first wife.
Modo Ajoba.
Yeah. There are cases where there's actually a recorded case where the first wife punished him by not, I don't know what, she didn't cook for him food or something, and he, because of tradition and the importance of time in tradition, basically the sequences of events. I think let me put it more specific: the importance of sequences of events in Luo culture, where each person had their role in a specific sequence of events. So if somebody did not do their role in that at their specific time, then it could literally put everything to a halt. So there was actually a man who could not leave his hut because the first wife refused to do. I've forgotten what the first wife refused to do, but because of that, the man could not leave his hut, and he had to, and the people, his other wives, I don't know, had to send food from, like, put food, I don't know, from the window or from the door, but they could not enter. So he was stuck there until the first wife carried out her role at that specific time. So that was how it was. A very interesting system, actually. So you can see where people had their power when their time came. When you are time for you to do something, that is where you held power, and it was a very interesting way of distributing power, basically, towards the community. But I was just comparing monarch, and I was comparing that to like a monarchy where the leader of the monarchy, be it a queen or a king, had all the power, right? He was the villagers or the kingdom was just his compound. And so I was just comparing how life would be in such a system, in those two different systems. So, but you've come and said that West Africa, okay, let me say, yeah, West Africa, because there are a lot of monarchies in West Africa, lived in a different time where they were under attack from genocidal Europeans. Although I'm not researched much. I'm not going to lie. I don't have much knowledge about West African before Europeans. I don't. If you can even recommend, maybe I'll even read about it. But that was basically my point.
Well, I would just say that most people think of well, I don't know. I'm not 100% sure, but usually they think of Nzinga in Central Africa, as opposed to West Africa. But as far as the monarchy and the time, I think people can develop cultures, but you have to also remember, like I said, it really depends on what time period you're talking about, you know, because what Nzinga is a part of a people, I think they're called the Jaga, or maybe, but essentially these are a people formed after like the invasion. You know, they're formed as a defense mechanism. It's kind of like, you know, you have, you know, just a regular African man, regular black man, and you put him in like in modern times, you put him in a nice neighborhood, or you put him in, you know, a bad neighborhood, right? And his behavior is going to be shaped by the bad behavior as well as by the good behavior. Like if you have a kid and you put him inside of a house and he's surrounded by video games, he might grow up to be a gamer. He might grow up to program games. He might grow up to do game commentary or watch videos of video games, you know? Whereas if you put a kid inside of an environment surrounded by guns and cars and whatever, he might watch car videos and gun videos and violent movies, and he might go shooting people, he might go robbing people, that kind of things. And so yeah, you know, if you're talking about the Luos in Eastern Africa or in Kenya at a certain time period where they're more isolated from, you know, Arabs and what have you, then yeah, they're gonna have a nice little system that works for them, you know, that's, you know, calm, peaceful, whatever. But then if you're talking about, you know, let's say, um, okay, like let's say we go to Eastern Africa, you talk about Zanzibar, and when the Arabs were, you know, just pretty much just molesting girls left and right, right? It was a totally different culture, you know. It could be the same people, but when you have a cultural clash, or when you're invaded by other people, or when things are disrupted, and basically, you know, one of the things I really want people to get is that if a people are not in power, right, you really can't judge them too harshly, you know. I mean, sure, we can say, hey, well, Nzinga was in power. What was she? You know, she was taken out, like she was pretty much taken away from her birthright. Well, technically she had no birthright, but she was pretty much exiled from her village. Her brother, I think, killed her only son to make sure she had no descendants, type thing. She was, you know, exiled. She had to go to another people. She was pretty much it's there's a whole host of things, and then she had to fight every day of her life so that her people were not carried out into slavery. You know, that's a very different ecology or a different environment than, you know, hey, we you know, we are, you know, we're just in a, you know, we're just in a land isolated from other people, because there's a lot of people, you know, whether you're West Africa, East Africa, North Africa, wherever, there's a lot of people who are just isolated from the outside, and they're not going to act the same as people who are fighting to stay free, you know. And I think that's one of the things, because when you tell me that story of, hey, you know, she let these two people fight to the death, it's like, yeah, she values combat, she values fighting, she values future generations, she values usefulness, you know. That's what you're supposed to value in the you know, in the event of attack. It's kind of like when people say, well, what are you going to do in a zombie apocalypse, right? And like, let's say there's a zombie apocalypse, it's not a real thing, but let's say there is, you know, are you going to carry around the person who cannot shoot? Are you going to carry around the person who cannot keep up when you guys are walking? Or are you going to leave them to be eaten? Or are they going to be able to take the same amount of resources as the person who's a sharpshooter, as a so on and so forth? Like, in an environment of scarcity, an environment of hostility, can you really judge human beings for saying, you know what, we can't carry around dead weight? Like, can you judge them for that? And like, sure, you know, we can in our comfort say, well, you know, if I were in that situation, I'd feed both people. But where are they growing food? You know, like they were stripped of their land. Where are they growing food? How are they getting food? You know, it's easy if you can grow food and you have all that kind of stuff to say, hey, why don't you just feed everybody? That's possible, but when you're being hunted, it's not as easy. That's what I would say.
Yeah, okay, I agree with you. Although it's not, I don't think there was peace in East Africa as it may be. East Africa was also, there was a lot of wars happening in East Africa. There was There was the what is it? There was the war between the Maasai and there was the war between the Bunyora, the Nandi. Although these were African on African wars, but they were wars, right? So I don't think that fighting was not considered valuable asset. It was even during that time. Warriors were still considered valuable. Even if you can even look at the Maasai, you know, they're a warrior tribe. Basically, in fact, it's actually documented that before the Mzungu actually entered East Africa, it was war torn to the point that the tribes within Western Kenya were building houses of stone. Did you know that, guys? Did you know that that Western houses were made of stone? Not because of some sort of
Where was this?
yeah,
Where was
yeah.
this?
Okay, you can Google. You can just Google right now. Let me put it on the private chat.
Okay.
They were building houses made of stone, not because of architectural what is it, innovation, but out of pure necessity, because we are living in warring times, and you can't have a madhouse during times when somebody can just kick that thing and kill your family. It was you can even Google it and show us Tanzania, but so it wasn't exactly peaceful times, but still there was no monarchy. My point was that
well, look, I don't know. I'll say this because I'm not 100% sure, but I believe the Moana Matapa, like it was like an empire type thing,
Yeah.
And that was also a stone, like a stone, like structure. I think there were. I mean, as far as like see, the thing about monarchy is that monarchies are, I feel like, a really ancient African type of organization. And by ancient, of course I'm talking about Egypt type thing. But I don't think that monarchies are necessarily the problem. And not just that, I think that a lot of monarchies, if you go back in time, they were not like absolute power. I think that because even if you're talking about Nzinga and them, like they didn't have absolute power. The one who probably did have absolute power was Shaka Zulu, but that was not customary. So before Shaka Zulu, like you had to like a lot of times, a lot of people would say that in Africa, monarchies or kings were not absolute dictators. What you would find absolute dictators in Europe, but not so much in Africa. The Nzinga thing of the people fighting, I don't know if that's the example of absolute monarchy as much as it's just a reality that people, like that's just like that's the impact of not. And again, like when you say war versus invasion, like it's a totally like the amount of the kind of force that Europeans had was not like the force that we had was not comparable to the force that Europeans had, and that's really like the gist of it. It's that morphs your dynamic. It's kind of like if two guys are fighting in a bar, right? It's not that bad. It's not that damaging. And even if two guys pull out knives, it's not that bad. But if a guy pulls out a handgun, it's pretty bad. But then if a guy brings out an assault rifle, right? It's completely different. It's not even comparable. It's like you guys see about the church shootings or the mosque shootings or the supermarket shootings, going on in America. This is one individual who can walk into any building and just kill 30 people in a minute before anybody has time to respond. You can't do that with a knife per se. I mean, you could if you're really good with the knife, but no, not in a minute, right? This is what, and this is just one individual. When Europeans came to slaughter villages and slaughter, communities, they did not just send one individual to do so. So imagine instead of one individual being able to take out an entire community, Like just take out a community anywhere on the planet, really, and then now imagine it's 1,000 individuals, walking into this community, right? So that kind of war versus, hey, you know what, we fought each other and whatever we had, whatever weapons we had, whether it was flamethrowers, it doesn't matter. Whatever weapon we had, it's different from the machine gun. And that's like something that we really have to recognize that when these white people came, it wasn't like it was a totally different level of warfare. Again, they slaughtered 2 continents, and these are continents, not like countries, not cities, not communities. They slaughtered 2 continents. Something that's unthinkable today. And they just slaughter that.
Yeah, okay, I agree. I don't even disagree with you, my brother. All I'm saying is that we're just comparing. Actually, what I'm just comparing systems of governance and which one is like the most effective. Basically, I don't. I get that during that time, the invasion and the from the white man who was coming to exactly, especially that's what I'm saying when they came. The way you just told us that he came to be genocidal and all that, and I understand, but I'm talking about the system of governance. Was it an effective system of governance compared to the non-monarchs? That's like what do you think about that question? What do you think was the most effective system of governance?
Yeah, I think that centralized states are more effective than decentralized states. Because it's easier to defend yourself when you are centralized. I think that we kind of exaggerate, how much self defense you can do when you're decentralized, but realistically, America is centralized. China is centralized. Russia is centralized. England was centralized. France was centralized. Portugal was centralized. The empires, we know about them because they were able to resist more or resist better. But the people who were decentralized, like, sure, maybe some of them survived, but a lot of them were wiped out. Like we don't like we tend to forget that a lot of us were wiped. Like a lot of African people were wiped out. It's not and they're just lost forever. We might say, hey, Africa has, I don't know, 3,000 languages right now. It's possible that before the European or the Arab or whatever, we had 10,000 languages, 20,000 languages. It's just that these people were just wiped out of the face of the planet. And the large empires were able to resist a little better and had their so on and so forth. But the small communities, the small villages, those are nice, but like again, if I can walk into, well, not me, but if some little punk kid can walk into a supermarket and just gun down people, modern day people, with an assault rifle, like what do you think armies were doing in Africa? Like what do you think they were doing? And sure, you could say, hey, some of us just ran and hid inside of a village. Yeah, I mean, inside of a forest or something, probably. Or we ran and hid in a swamp, probably. But that's like some of them died in that process too. It's really, I would say, like me personally, I think centralized government is the way. I don't think, obviously I'm not really a fan of absolute monarchies, but even that would be better than essentially just no sort of real ability to defend yourself against aggressors. That's what I would say.
Yeah, it's okay. I think this is the common misconception of decentralization, that there will be no ability to defend. I think centralization is good for conquering. Uh, if you have the spirit of conquering, or if you have the spirit of what is it? Is it? Yeah, basically, yes, just conquest. I still believe maybe centralized government might be even more effective. But when it comes to like the people, the citizens of the centralized government, I think even Tanzania should probably know about this more than me because I've seen her talk about this in the other shows. But the sacrifices that people of these European countries had to make, especially the British, I think that's the one that's been most talked about. I don't know about the France, but yeah, even France, you know, the amount of suffering the people of that centralized government had to go through, you know, it's just probably even, you know, just as bad as what they did to other countries. Like the amount of millions of people, millions of British people had to die literally so that the you know the aristocracy had to come to just to gain power or something like that. So you have all these, you know, you have main records of kings just killing people with impunity because maybe they didn't like what they said, or I don't know how. Look at the mental anguish or the mental attack or the mental situation living in such a place where just a king just doesn't like what you say and you are now dead and he's just killing you. Or I don't know. It's not. I don't think the glamorization of central. I think the invention of the gun. I think the invention of the gun is what made all these cultures seem to be superior. But it's really just the invention of the gun. Without the invention of the gun, this culture, these types of governments were vastly inferior because they always, when they were just stuck with themselves, when they could not move to Africa and steal African resources, they could not move to America and still without a fight, without a proper fight. I think when they were just stuck with themselves, it was a very pathetic system of government. I feel like they were really having a tough time. So I don't think centralized government is that superior to decentralized government. Really, that's my point.
Well, I would actually. So here's the thing. I would probably say, like how the invention of the gun, right? What if it were aided by centralized government? You know, as to say that, you know, we have to think about it this way, right? In a decentralized situation, why are you sharing gun technology with the next person? You know, as opposed to a centralized situation, why wouldn't you share your gun? I mean, share the gun technology with at least other people within your community, you know, within your so on and so forth. I actually, I guess today I did a video in a robe, but I did a video of how realistically we are in conflict with each, like we're in competition with each other, but we're in cooperatives that are in competition with each other, right? And so, you know, realistically, what centralized versus decentralized really means is how big is your cooperative, you know? Kind of going back to Tanzan's earlier point about, you know, a nation having multiple languages as opposed to a tribe having one language, right? If you have multiple language, or like, let's say if you're bigger than a tribe, right? Then your cooperative, let's say, now has more human capital available, more intellectual capital, more cooperation available than if you are as small as a tribe. Now, granted, you could have a very large tribe. You know, you could have a tribe that's larger than a nation, obviously. But what it really comes down to is that if we're talking about, for instance, Europe, right? Europe unites its different tribes into different nations, right? And then those nations are now competing with each other to stay ahead of each other in terms of weaponry, in terms of technology, in terms of military strategy, and so on and so forth. Now they become pretty damn good at killing each other and pretty damn good at war and pretty damn good at innovation for war and killing each other, right? By the time they show up to Africa, where we are not necessarily keeping a pace with our like our neighbors are not necessarily, you know, warmongers or whatever, right? They are, you know, 3 technological steps ahead um in terms of weaponry, in terms of attacking each other. Now obviously we're better at, you know, more important things, but they're better at killing people. And that sort of clash, you know, that does something. And I think it really does relate to, well, they did centralize. You know, they did centralize. They weren't just the Anglo-Saxons, or they weren't just the Angles and the Saxons. They weren't just the I don't know, Teutons. I don't know what they're freaking called, but they weren't just that. They decided to be British. They decided to be French. They decided to be German, and that did something for them.
Yeah, but yes, Tanzania had something to say.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That eventually, after sacrificing millions of their own people, they came up with a way. But you see, that's what I'm not talking about. Like, are you saying? And have had this argument before. Like, are you okay, or are you okay? Yeah, basically, are you okay with that happening in Africa, where millions of Africans are sacrificed by Africans for this type of what you call progress, right? Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Wait, sorry. Let me. I have to go to the door for a second. Hold on a second. I mean, Tanzan, you can answer. I'll just have to go to the door for a second. Hold on.
Yeah, no problem. You're saying, are we ready to make the sacrifices it takes?
Yeah, because the sacrifice was millions of their own people dying of hunger, starvation, as you steal their land, because it's centralized now. You need these guys to work. You need for money. You need to incentivize them to work for you for money, right? So you have to steal their land. You have to, you have to make them starve. You have to. So millions will die. You have to literally, go
Yeah, I can
massacre
say that we're
dictators.
doing the same thing. I can say that we're doing the same thing. It's just that we're not doing it for ourselves, because it's not like our people, are not dying, haven't died. It's not like our people have not been sacrificed and all of that. So we've gone through the same. It's just that the people for us who are doing it are not doing it for our people, So, yeah. So I
Yeah,
think
we are doing it
one.
now, but then we didn't do it. Then I'm saying why because then we didn't have, we had different objectives. I think that's something we need also to understand, that our ancestors and the ancestors of our and the European ancestors had different objectives, right? So when you talk about these guys, like when you give somebody, one person, the power to rule, he's going to do everything in his power to be there, to make sure, and him and his aristocrats, basically the ruling elite, that have just demonstrated that Africans, in some African systems, which are very interesting, but they didn't have that, right? Now we do have ruling elites, because we are also in a centralized government, so we can't really compare
Well,
this
let
type of
me.
government. You can't
I'll
really
just
compare.
say.
Okay, let me say my point then. You can't really compare this type of government that we are in now, because it's European centered. Our laws are basically European laws, so it's really we are having the African governments now are European governments. You know, they are European inspired governments. Even the laws, all that come from have European origin. So it's not easy to compare now. But I was comparing them then. You know, back
Let me.
when our government or our system of governance was not European. Will it even make sense to our ancestors to start killing off, you know millions, if a huge chunk of their population, so that one person or a group of small people can rule over the rest of the.
Well, I'll say this. I don't think it's necessary for them to kill off their leaders. I mean, they kill off their own people. I think that they probably Europeans did it because they're like that. Like again, they live in an environment that you know rewards that. And remember, again, it's always a question of um, what is like why are you quote unquote sacrificing people? Is it to save more people? You get what I'm saying? It's like why would I, like, for instance, my son, like we're saying I'm in an African country and my son says I'm going to join the military. um he joins the military, and that's like a human sacrifice in a sense. but he's joining the military in order that his people are not wiped out. Or like, for instance, I was watching this movie that the Japanese produced based off of can't remember the name of it. I think it's like Fire or something like that. But um, it's based off of the story of how they were trying to develop a nuclear weapon before America, and of course they don't. But a large part of the reason why, some people are like, some of the Japanese are like, should we even develop a bomb? Is it good to develop a bomb? What's the point of developing a bomb? And they're like, well, if we don't develop the bomb first, America will use it against us. And of course, lo and behold, America does use it against Japan, and it does wipe out two cities in the blink of an eye. And never mind how much firebombing it did. So as to say that if you are being assaulted, if you're being attacked, right? If you lose a few people, because a lot of these Japanese, I should say, in fact, they voluntarily went into airplanes. They call them kamikaze. Everybody knows about them. They voluntarily went into airplanes in order to stop the American advance by, flying their plane into Americans, like suicide bombing. Just the same as they would also do that with submarines, just run their submarines into American submarines. But why would they give up their lives, or why would the city, or why would the country, or like these people not only voluntarily give up their lives, but their country also, gave their lives away. Why? Because they understood if they didn't risk one, or like if they didn't crack a few eggs, they wouldn't make an omelet. Or in other words, if they did not, like they could have lost a lot more if they didn't just control their own losses, and so I'm not saying that I would encourage people to go around, killing their own people, so on and so forth. But it's also worth noting that in dire situations, it does become, well, like for instance, if there's a group of us, there's men, women, and children, it does become that, or like, here's a good example. If somebody breaks into your home, right, it does become that you send the man out to look at who broke into the home and possibly defend the home. Now, this puts the man at great risk, but if the man does not get up and try to stop the assailant can kill the children and the women and the man. So you sometimes have to have some sort of sacrifice in order for the larger collective to benefit, because like I keep stressing, the Australians were wiped out and the Native Americans were wiped out. I think it was probably at that point common knowledge that the Europeans were wiping out populations. It was not like, it wasn't hopscotch. It wasn't a game. Like they literally cleared out a whole continent, two continents, and they were moving in on a third one. Anyway, I actually have to step down from this, but I could I'll listen offline, if that's okay. Well, unless Mona had a question for me.
I had a question.
Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, but you see, the question is, before the invention of the gun, don't you think the European tried to invade Africa and failed?
Did he try to invade Africa?
Before the invention of the gun, did they attempt and failed, or do you think?
Before the invention of the gun, the European was under the heel of the Arabs.
Okay, then the Arab, whoever the empire that existed at that time, before the invention of the gun, do you think that they did not try to invent Africa?
Yeah, the Arabs did invade
and
Africa.
failed.
Well, I don't think they failed. They were, like you said, they were deep in East Africa, and they were they're deep in North Africa, and a lot of the empires in West Africa became Islamicized. Like the Muslims are really influential in Africa. Like they were there for now 1,600 years.
Okay. I think before. Okay, was that during the gun time? During gunpowder was invented, or before? Because I think before, I think Africa was holding its own just fine. I feel Like,
I think the
yes,
Arabs were there for a long time because a lot of those kingdoms and empires you're talking about, they were Islamicized. So you have
yeah, but
Songhai.
you see, those Arabs, those guys you're calling Arabs are Africans. You know, like Mansa Musa, he was, yes, he was an
Yeah, but they're
Islamic.
really Islamicized. They're influenced by Arab culture big time. And then like we, I guess I don't speak Swahili as good as you two, but yeah, Swahili is very Arabized, very Arabized too. So yeah, the Arabs really had a deep influence and deep impact in Africa. To the point where the language that even the three of us, were speaking a month ago. That's a like some people would argue it's an Arab language. It's not, obviously,
Now,
but some people would
okay,
argue that.
first of all, I think we should. I think this narrative that Swahili is Arabized should. I don't think it should be. It's a very bad perspective of looking at African languages, like as if European languages don't have a lot of Arabic words or words of Arab origin. So it's not. This is It's like Africans have no impact on history. It's like Africans just our work is to be influenced, or our work is to like we don't have we cannot make an impact, or our part in history is just to be subjugated, and that's not true. So having a language like like Swahili that was used to trade, it was originally a trade language between the East African Bantus and the Arabs, even Chinese. There's even evidence of China, not even
Yeah, I
evidence.
agree. I'm gonna
They,
step down though. I'm gonna see you guys offline. Okay. Appreciate
uh,
the conversation, bro and sis.
Yes, thank
Da
you.
da da kaka. Ha, I got it.
Yes, thank you for joining.
asante, asante.
Asante sana. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So my point is that first of all, if you look at Yemen, what's the color of a lot of people in Yemen, right? Do we say why not say that Yemen or Middle East was Africa? I've never heard that. Yemen was Africanized. But look, what's the color of the people in Yemen? You know, these people
Yeah.
will.
The
Yeah,
influence is always on us when we don't influence anything at all.
yeah. That's the narrative. That's the
Yeah.
narrative. What's the color of the people in southern India?
Hmm.
You know, it's do you hear them people saying southern India was Africanized? But here we are being told that Africans. So the truth is that Africans also influenced. We have also had our impact on history, and our language has evolved like any other language, even European language. Or Asian languages, you will find that there are always some words, if not a lot of words, probably that are of foreign origin, but because of trade and all that, they became part of the language. That is just normal culture. So people should not criticize Swahili because it was originally a language of trade, and because of that, it has become even widely accepted, in East Africa. I think because it is actually a very beautiful language to me. Because if it was not a language of trade,
Yeah.
if it was just a tribal language, we will not be here speaking Swahili because it will be rejected.
Let me tell you why. Kiswahili is such a, yeah, just like saying English was Latinized and all that. Yeah, Kiswahili has influences from all this other language, but in its in its structure, even when you look at Kikuyu, counting words, the counting words in Kikuyu are very similar to English, to Kiswahili, except for I think the one Arab word was Saba, and probably maybe Chisa or something, but most of the words sound even Meru and all these languages. As far back, somebody did like the similarities between Kiswahili and I think it was like a South African language. I don't know if it was Sotho or something, but they had languages. Even the word for goat, the way they started, with the MB. Kiswahili has a lot of those, double consonants, the mb, ng, those kinds of words. I'm sure Arabic has those words too, but it's more common in African languages. Even Lingala and those languages, a lot of their words are very Kiswahili sounding. So to claim that an Arab language that was Africanized instead of an African language that was Arabized is just to take away all the the linguistic evidence that's there. Kiswahili is more common to the local African languages than it would be to Arabic, and even if it was similar to Arabic, it's not an Arabic language. So sometimes I think that we don't want to give Africans, any credit for anything, Not that we're denying that there's been influences, but it's an African language. That's why it was so easy for Africans to take to it and to be able to speak it, instead of English or some other language. But yeah.
Yeah. Actually, this was what I was arguing about this. I think it was last year, December, in a show. It was a very short show, but I was arguing that there was this book from this guy called, it's a West African guy. Let's see if I can get his name right now. His name is, but he wrote a book about decolonization. It's a very complex name. Olufemi Taiwo. Olufemi Taiwo.
Okay.
That's his name. He wrote a book about. He's saying that decolonization sometimes pushes its agenda outside its realm. It should not be. He talks about decolonization. It's a very. I haven't read the book, but I'm waiting for it. But it talks about this, that this, when you talk about Swahili, that it should not be having any Arab words, or this is not decolonization. This is just decolonization that is outside of its jurisdiction. Like he says, decolonization should just remain about self-determination and freedom. It should not be pushed to other things like cultural exchanges and stuff like that. It should not. It's a very interesting argument he has, but that's the point that I see here. That when you claim that Swahili is influenced by the Arabs, but the fact that I think there's a place in Omani. There are people in Omani that speak Swahili. Is it Oman? Is it Omani or Oman? I don't know. But there are people in there are also African. There are also people in Yemen that speak Habesh, or African, an Ethiopian language. I don't know what it is. I think it's Habesha. So you can find that even in India, there are Bantu speaking people.
Yeah, but why would you say that the influence was one way or another? Why wouldn't you say then that there was Swahili people who went to Oman and Yemen and as far as India? Because we have,
exactly. That's exactly my point. That's exactly my point. That people don't understand, especially East African. People dismiss East African history. I see this a lot. A lot of East Africa has very rich history, but it's dismissed because it's always assumed that it is Arab history. Like the Swahili people did not have it. It's not true. That is extremely not true. There was a lot of influence in Swahili culture. Swahili culture was very much having an influence in basically Asia. That's my point. Sometimes people when they talk about Swahili food, we feel this is just influenced by. No, it's not. Swahili food is not like Indian food. People when you look at it and you eat even chapati. Do you know that Indian chapati and East African chapati are two different types of chapatis? It's not. People think, this is. It's not. Indian, East African, our food. Yes, they have similarities, but it's not the same. It's like there is a huge difference. Like chapati cooked in Kenya, it's not the same as chapati.
Right, it's like the Mexican tortilla. They also have a tortilla, but it's different from a chapati.
It's different, but nobody tells the Mexican. Nobody tells the Mexican that they were influenced by Indians.
Right.
So,
right.
but Africa, we are under attack. Like nobody can come up with the flatbread. Come on.
Yeah, Kasidra, learn Kiswahili. It's very easy to learn. It's phonetic. There's no hidden sounds and crazy spellings. You say no, but there's a K in front of it. the B read and read are written the same and pronounced differently. No, Kiswahili is a very easy language to learn once you get over the pronunciations of the consonants. I think that's where most Western people have a problem with. They say ndege or ngombe or something. So they say the word and then they say or chala instead of just saying chala or yeah. So they tend to say the word before they say the word one word before they don't combine it. But otherwise, the rest of it should be easy. Just learn a bit. There's you can take programs, you can sound it out, but the best way is just to have somebody to speak it with. But yeah, you can learn. People have learned Kiswahili from all over, and it will. And even if you don't have, you're not like fluent in it, you just learn enough to at least familiarize yourself and speak basic conversation. People appreciate the effort, even if you don't have to be perfect. Just trying shows that kind of effort. But yeah, because even us Kenyans, who we will speak Kiswahili, but ours is more like this Sheng mixture of things. So
Yeah, that is just our dialect of Swahili.
yes.
There is nothing.
So
There's
that's
nothing wrong with sharing. It's now,
nothing at all.
we have
Yeah.
accepted that that is how we are going to talk. It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, the same way there are different dialects of English.
Mhm.
Like we should also accept that we have different dialects of Swahili. So that is
Yeah.
ours.
Yeah. For sure. For sure. But yeah, we should start wrapping up soon. I thought I was going to be here for now, but thank you for at least keeping me company, so I don't have to talk to myself for 2 hours. But it's been great being back, having a conversation. You're going to do your show tomorrow, right?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, talking about African identity. So yeah, it's
Oh, okay,
practically
cool. No,
might be
not
just a
tomorrow. Tomorrow is Saturday. No, tomorrow is Sunday. Yes,
yeah.
that's
It's
right.
tomorrow.
It's just
Yeah, we're going to. It's going to be practically just a continuation, man.
okay, yeah. So tune in tomorrow for Monday Tesis program.
Yeah,
Um,
Barack Obama will be joining us too. So if you're interested.
okay, cool. All right, SB, welcome. I don't know why. Did you have something you disagreed with? Was it something they said? That's a very general statement to make that you don't like someone. So if you had a particular object opinion or something that you disagree with, feel free to share. So yeah, otherwise oh, before we go, what were you saying about that site, that stone site?
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, the Tilmich Ohanga.
Yes.
It's actually stone structures. It's actually a stone. Like yeah, it's a. If you look at the, it was built during the war,
Mm-hmm.
during war times.
Okay.
Like people assume East Africa was just like Paradise, man. These
It's
tribes
very
were going
nice.
at war.
It's
Yeah,
very nice looking. Yeah.
yeah. It was built during the war between the Luo and the Maasai.
Okay.
They were deep in a very tough war. That it was the war for it
For
was the war for
cattle and
East
land.
Africa because yeah,
Was it a war for cattle and land?
yeah, it was a war for land. It was a war for land. It was a war for expansion.
Okay.
Basically,
Yes. Yes.
yeah. As you can see, if you okay, I don't know if the map is today. I don't know how the map shows today, but if you could see before during those days, Maasais were very. I don't know what I think. People forget that. I think is it Oni that was here right now?
Yes.
Yeah. He had a very good point about how many Africans were killed by the Europeans, and people
Mhm.
forget that a lot of Maasais were killed by the Europeans. Like
Oh,
people, yeah,
yeah, because
yeah,
a lot of the lands were also also taken, right?
Yeah, a lot of Masai. They had huge property, land. Like it's not like not like the way you think you see it, a lot of their land was taken, and a lot of them were killed. Like they used to reach, like they used to reach central Western Kenya. You know that? That's what I'm telling you.
Wow.
Like like northern, like where is it? You know Trans Nzoia. I don't know if you've heard of Trans Nzoia.
Yes. Yes, I
Yeah,
know about Trans Nzoia.
yeah. That used to be Masai. Masai used to reach until that far. Like they
Wow.
were many. They weren't as little as they were many. They used to be a lot of
I
Masais.
can just imagine.
Yeah.
Just imagine.
So yeah,
And
they
you
were
know, the way
actually,
they're all dressed in that red and then they're just, descending upon everybody.
yeah. It was
Ooh.
actually a war. It was actually a war. In fact, the white man caught Kenyans in between our war. You know,
Mhm.
like it was a
Let
war
me
of
ask you this
expansion.
before we leave, because we don't have too much time. I'll be leaving soon. But what would you say to, because I know that you have done an episode on time, and just before now,
Mm.
Mika had and do check it out on Swahili Nation. Mika had a very interesting segment. He talked about time. I think he's going to continue with it later, but he was talking about time, Africans and time. What do you think about this concept of Africans and time? Do you think that Africans generally are not good with time? And because SB is saying that he didn't like the person who said that Africans don't keep time, that's a stereotype. Do you think it's a stereotype, or do you think there's some truth in it?
Uh, I think it's okay. Yeah, I think you cannot generalize like that. I think Africans keep time. It depends on the type of African you're dealing with. I think, but in the end of the day, I feel like it's this saying that African time is a it's a. I'm not gonna lie. It because I think because of people who say that. I think because people who say that it's becoming very influential. Like it became in, I don't know who came up with that African time concept. I think I suspect it is white supremacy. Some Zungu probably who came up with that concept of African time, right? Usually, this is how it does. These types of things go. If you look deep enough, you probably find, oh, these things have colonial origin. But because of that, I think people, Africans, have embraced it. I feel like some Africans, not all, but a lot of Africans have embraced it. And it's like African time is like an excuse. It's like you've given him an excuse to maybe late or something. But this is not general. I think a lot of Africans keep time. I think I think Africans keep as much time as everybody else in the world. I don't. Although I have seen many people complain. I'm trying to be diplomatic, but I've seen. Yeah,
Me, I'll say this, and look, I'm not, yeah, I know it's not, yeah, but Africans keep time for work. Like when it comes to work, they will be there on time. Like if somebody tells you I'm going to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning, believe me, they're going to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning. Nobody is sleeping in, in Africa. In fact, if you're sleeping in after, a certain time, people will look at you funny, like, what is wrong with you? So when it comes to work and serious things, if it comes to that, I would say that Africans keep time. When it comes to school, you remember going to school, you have to be there on time, no matter how far you're coming from. If you're coming from far, wake up early. It doesn't matter. So latecomers were punished in school. So we learn how to keep time from school. We have, the school bells that are rung. You have to be there for, so yeah, when it comes to serious things, work and school, definitely we keep time. Yeah. So no, and SB, I'm not speaking for all Africans, even me. I will. Nobody here is so presumptuous. We're just stating our opinions here. No one here is speaking for all Africans. We're just and generalization is it's not to saying all Africans, of course. We're simply saying, sometimes it's just anecdotal. No, the facts and statistics have not been collected, but Yeah, no. We're all different. We're all different. Nobody's claiming to speak for all Africans. Not even myself. Not even Tezi. You know,
Yeah,
we
but I
we
will say
speak.
this. I will say
Mhm.
this though. Before this colonization, before when we were living in our own element, time
Mhm.
we were keeping time in our own because time was important, especially when you like fishing, you have to there or hunting or just even farming. All these economic activities that we used to do, and we still do, but they all require to be very disciplined when it comes to time.
Yeah,
So
like farming, like waking up in the morning. You know how early farmers have to wake up to go to the field. You're not going to be, digging and doing these things. In fact, they prefer to wake up early when the sun is still not up. They, letting out the chickens who have to come out like around maybe 6:30. The cows have to be fed, given food. Some of them have to be milked. You have to go. The people who work the farm, they have to go there early and start digging. So yeah, people actually not even keeping time. I would say that we were early. We were before time. We were earlier than time. Here they start work at 9. We in the countryside, for example, when you go to the countryside, people start working sometimes as early as 5 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes even before the sun comes out. So yeah, people work very very hard, and in they're earlier than time. I would say this, like I was saying earlier, when it comes to the important, the serious things, work, school, and so on, the Africans definitely are either before time or they keep time, but they take care of what is to be done early enough. But, and let me just honest, when it comes to social things, when it comes to meeting people or saying, oh, let's do this, if there's no, somebody hanging, you've been in matatus where people just lie. Somebody's telling you, oh, I'll be there at 1 o'clock, and meanwhile they're just leaving. They haven't even gotten in the shower yet, and it's going to take them forever. Or somebody's saying, oh yeah, I'm just down the street, and meanwhile you're stuck in traffic. So when it comes to things like that, there are some things that Africans keep time on. When it's something important, when it comes to work, when it comes to school, when it comes to important things. But on a social level, yeah, not as much, not as much. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's the best way to put it. Like there are situations like events and social. Yeah, that one you're going to have to. Yeah, there is no
Hey,
hurry.
hey,
There's no hurry.
hey.
Yeah, but
That's
also
one thing that even Kenyans out here learn, that if you're going to have a function, you tell the Kenyans one time and you tell the Americans another time. Because the first, you tell somebody 3 o'clock, for a party or an event, the first person will be there at 5 o'clock. So just, and then that can be a little bit annoying sometimes, because especially like if you book a place and then people start showing up like an hour before you have to leave. Like, I told you you have to be here. Like, yes, yes, yes. So when it comes to social events, yeah, we have a bit to a bit of improvement to be made.
yeah, yeah. But also, I've also understood that when you book things, like you have to accept some things. Like if you book, if you, if you book at, you also have to give incentive. You say lunch will be served at at 12 to 1. You people will be there 11:50. Yes.
And then they'll come late and they'll be angry at you that you served the food on time.
Yeah, you see, this is the, but if you put, if you have also events at if events at maybe 3, obviously people African will assume 3 is afternoon,
Of course.
jioni, jioni, so they'll come at jioni. Yeah, to them 3 to 6, no, 3 to 6 if it's a afternoon or evening event. To them
Yeah.
3 to 7 is the same time. Is
This is
that?
real. You just show up, whenever. You start getting ready at 3.
Yeah. So yeah, I think this is something you should also learn that in Africa, if it's an event or it's a big, for leisure,
Eh,
things like
eh,
morning, lunch, and afternoon are at the same
mhm.
time. Like
It's just
like morning is morning. There is no specific time in morning. Lunch is lunch. That is from
eh,
those hours that count as lunch are all
eh.
early hours. Say afternoon, you just know that people will be coming in late afternoon. Like those
Yeah,
are,
it's just going to be late afternoon, people are just going to come in, and then you just have to accept it. And then there's no end time. That's the other thing. There's no time that, okay, now it's over. If you tell somebody, we're starting at 3 to 6, it's not as if, if 6 o'clock, reaches at it, that's the end of it. No, people still want to continue. Or some people came in late, and there's no end time. There's no end time to things like that. So you might as well just say afternoon to whenever. It's not a party between 5 to 7 p.m. People come in and at 7 they leave. People will start coming at 6 and they want to stay.
yeah,
You're kicking us out. Hey, especially if it's like a home, where you're not like booked or anything, like you don't have to be kicked out. You're at your place. Hey, people are not going to respect at yet. You say that in Paka 7. Okay, now guys, it's 7 o'clock. See, the party's over. Hey, hey.
yeah, and some will sleep. Some of
Yeah,
them,
of
some
course.
will want to sleep, so
Hey,
they'll ask for the blanket and mattress, and
hey.
yeah.
Them, that's their evening plans. That's their whole day plans.
Yeah, I think that's also part of African. I don't know if you can say it's African philosophy. It's just part of, yeah.
Yeah, it's
That's,
just part of our culture. That's just part of our tradition, part of our culture. It's just, it's just who we are.
yeah, which is
Done
to me to
without
me.
any malice. It's not that people come late just because they're rude or they don't respect your time or anything like that. I don't know. They they're just
Yeah, and also part of African culture is not to take offense, not to be. If you're an easily offended person, you're not going to
Hey,
survive.
whoa, you'll be offended every day.
Yeah, you're just going to have to laugh at things. So just, yeah. So yeah, this is
Kwa
also
gari
good.
unakwambia nunua yako, sijui nini, sinunue gari yako. They're like, hey, you just leave it alone.
Yeah, somebody has SB saying, can you do
Oh, let's
it?
see. Can we do a topic about how African history has been whitewashed and is usually told by white archaeologists instead of African archaeologists? Yeah, I was saying earlier, when I was having, that conversation with myself, how a lot of our history, a lot of our artifacts is still in European museums, and that's unfortunate. We can do, even our archaeologists, I know that now we have our African University who are training the new generation of scholars, and that's wonderful and great, and I hope they have the funding and the resources to Africanize archaeology. Yeah, but in terms of some of that information, some of them is still, especially a lot of West African art is still in British museums, unfortunately. So even for us sometimes to get to that information, we have to go to them. But Tezzy, yeah, we can have
Yeah,
a problem on that maybe.
I think okay, yeah, obviously there is but people also don't people tend to ignore the African archaeologists. You
Okay.
know, I think we also should accept that people ignore them. They are there, and
Yeah.
if you look for their works, they are there. It's not something. If you like, because I even here I've quoted books written by African scholars and people who have done research in Africa.
Yes.
About so. I don't think maybe they're not popular as the Mzungus
Yeah, I
it?
think that
So
has a great deal to do with it, because also, most people are also just exposed to, to European literature. So SB, I would suggest you find the another thing also is that I don't know how much online actually you can find the information, because another thing also that prevents people from information is the paywall, or sometimes getting the physical copy of it. So for me, when I say we should digitize our traditions, it's that as well. We should get the knowledge of the elders. We should have recordings. We should go into the villages and actually talk to the elders, and get that information and knowledge from them before they pass. So at least we have that recorded. And we should also speak more about our own scholars, our own people who are doing the work. So yeah, I know those books, but unfortunately, especially in the West, you really won't find them as much. And then in Africa, you can find some books, but sometimes it's expensive or they're inaccessible. So I think that our next, the next project for especially the new generation would be to digitize, that information. So yeah, to have a
yeah,
site where Africans can go, like a Google Africa. Not I don't want to say even step on their toes. I think somebody should just have a place where Africans can collect that information, an academic forum for African scholars and students. So
yeah. Actually, they exist, but
yeah,
usually, if you look
mhm,
for, I think Google, if you look for just any information,
okay.
usually universities have repository, online report. Just African universities. You can take the University of Nairobi,
Yeah, but don't
Kenya
you have to
State
be
University.
a student or a staff?
Yeah, no, okay, maybe some works you can have to maybe, but a lot of that work usually just posted on their online repositories. You can just get it easily if you're looking for a specific, like if you're looking for archaeological. Sometimes Google also is very racist. So you might Google it and it's on the 10th page. So you're not going to go.
Nowadays, you don't even get to the 10th page. Nowadays, it's so useless. You have like two or three, pages, and then after that, it's just ridiculous. The internet has
Yeah, yeah.
really
They try to
shrunk.
discourage you. They try to discourage you to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're trying to discourage you from going any further. So, but if you just sometimes you just have to like, okay, just be specific with the university. Like, okay, if you're looking for African history, maybe this tribe's history, then just end your search with University of Nairobi. Just
Yes.
you you will find a lot of a lot of scholars who have actually done research or wrote papers, because every year people are writing papers. African scholars are doing research on something. There's somebody doing research on it. If there's a department of archaeology, in that university, you are telling me that they're just chilling now. They're doing the research. So if you're trying maybe to find like this thing with Johanga, like you can just say Johanga University of Nairobi, or maybe West African, the Queen of West Africa, or even Ethiopia. There's the University of Addis Ababa, right? I think there's a
Hmm.
University of Addis Ababa. Yeah,
Yeah.
just right. If you just Google anything about Ethiopia, then finish your search with University of Addis Ababa. You're going to
Yeah,
find
even
somebody.
Amika went there actually, and he had a session with the students. I think was it the university? I think it was like at the aeronautical school of university or something, but it was in Ethiopia. And he sat down with the students, and they had a very good session. So SB, if you get a chance, also look into the archives of SNN, and Mika has traveled to a lot of places and met the students and had good conversations with them. So yeah, definitely check that out. Yes, Ethiopia has a very long history, and yeah, so there's many many resources that you can look to. sometimes we have to be proactive. You can't just wait for the school to teach or for the curriculum to change. Sometimes you have to make your own personal curriculum. You have to go and search for that information and also share it. That's another thing. When you get that information, you should also share it with people, because there are a lot of people who don't know things that for you might seem obvious, because maybe you have been in contact, or your experience might be different. It's not common for everyone. So yeah, definitely search for the information, look for the university or for recent research papers, and then
Yeah.
you can still find you can still find some places that are some place, some content that is free. So
In fact, like
mhm,
the
yes.
other day we were arguing about the law. African societies did not have maybe a system of law.
Mm-hmm.
I actually went and searched university African as to African law. So that I don't know what I said. Then I finished with University of Nairobi,
Mm-hmm.
and there is actually in the law school of University of Nairobi. There's this doctor. I forgot her name, but she actually did a paper on that, a paper on African law, African systems of law before colonization. It was like just like that. So
Mm-hmm.
it was like the way you can actually access this information. If you They just have to be like clever about it when you are researching it, but it's there. Like whatever you want to learn about Africa, it's trust me, all these universities in Africa, all these people in Africa, they have done there is this assumption that just people are just chilling, waiting for the Mzungu to tell them that no. That's a very wrong assumption, and it's an assumption that you make because the internet is owned by the Mzungu, right? So
Yeah.
you'll find that that's what they are feeding. When you're not going to when you search it, Google is not going to take you to that is going to tell you something else. There's
Yeah.
this guy, this professor. He says that one of the internet is internet the internet is racist, like, and it's getting even more racist. Like what they show in Africa and what they show in Asia are two different things. Like when you look at maybe Facebook or social media, like we are the things they show in Facebook in Kenya or in Africa are the things they show I don't even think Facebook is in Asia, but whatever social media they have in Asia are two different things. Like in Asia, they're looking at constructive things like innovations, all these things. In Africa, they're looking at we are showed the twerking videos, you know
Yeah,
the
no, the screening in different countries is they are way, way, way different. And we're not we're not in the same world as as everyone. Basically, the whole world is on almost like a different internet space than us. So we also have to look at where are we getting our information from, where are we getting our knowledge and influence. So yeah, the internet, you have to be very specific. Yes, Marie Antoinette, I definitely agree with that. um yeah, so when we do the program SB, that's a lot. I know we can't cover everything today, but I think that's many of those sites were could have been damaged by governments, and at this point, so much has happened that we haven't really taken the full account, and I wouldn't put it past that. And yeah, my internet, so you knowing that when you go to search for something, you have it to be very intentional. As Stacey said, you have to search for the right sources, not just do a general or Google search and hope for the best. It's That's not really the way. It's a good way to start. Like if you're just looking for a cursory glance at something, then yeah, you can Wikipedia it and Google it and all that stuff. That's as I say, it's good enough for government work where it's just basic. But if you really want to go into the details of something, SB, and then anybody else, you should go for something specific, a trusted source. And then when you do find trusted sources, save those, and then you can always go and look up more information related to other subjects. So if you find, for example, like the University of Nairobi, and you for research for one subject, now you know that if you're researching for other subjects as well, whether it's history, geography, or general subjects, you have one source that you can start with and then go from there. So I think that we should also stop our dependency on just singular. We should have more options when it comes to looking for things, because if we leave that monopoly of information to one person, that's too much power in the hands of one person, and the information being what it is, it's very dangerous to leave it to others. So I think that when you're searching for things, change the way you search for things on the internet. Don't just Google it, start with that. Don't just Wikipedia it, but learn how to search, academic papers, university research papers, publications, and so on. Yeah. But yeah, that's my spiel for the day. Is save that information, digitize it, and share it.
Yeah, also follow. Okay, if you're in social media, you just find these Africans who are just informative about, who are just
Yes.
informative about just African issues and African. They talk a lot about that. They're activists, or they call themselves maybe public intellectuals. They are a lot. Just follow them on social media. They will also expose you to new information that you never knew.
Yes.
That's also something you should check out. So
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
I just found out how somebody just read, there are those who just expose you to something you never knew, how how Africa exports water. Did you know that?
It exports water.
Yeah.
Well, keep that one for later. That one will
Yeah,
that will open a whole new can of
yeah, but
worms.
not indirectly. It's not in the form of water, but in the form of avocados. How much water it takes to to get a fruit of avocado, and then you
Yeah.
look at you
Yeah.
know
We're just here to make other people rich. How about that?
and you find that other countries like European countries or Western countries, they don't do that. They don't export their
No.
they don't export water intensive fruits and
It's like you go to somebody's house and they sell you their bed, and now they have nothing to sleep on. It's yeah, it's ridiculous. But yeah, but so thank you everyone for joining. Asante sana, Marie Antoinette, for your kind words. Thank you to SB. Thank you for joining, and I hope you join again. And also, don't forget my Mwendatezi shows tomorrow, maybe around this time, maybe around an hour from this time. So make sure you
yeah.
join me Mwendatezi tomorrow. Yes. Thank
Yeah,
you.
we'll be continuing. We'll just be continuing this part of this
Mhm.
conversation, African identity. Just looking at that, we'll
Mhm.
be listening to Obama. He'll speak to he. I've got contacts of him. He's going to. Yeah, you'll be listening from his perspective. What is African identity? And yeah, a lot of small things here and there about African identity. So yeah, hopefully it will be as interesting as this show.
Oh yes, definitely. I'm sure it will be. Actually, this show was just a cool one. I enjoyed, being back. I enjoyed everybody who joined, and thank you as well, Mondatezi, for for the discussion, for a wonderful discussion. Yeah, so SB, asante sana for joining. Hata sisi tumeshukuru. Oh, good. Continue with the. I don't know if you speak Swahili or if you're learning, but if you're learning, continue. If you're speaking, continue as well. Casidra was here. Thank you as well for being here. And obviously, Marie Antoinette, our sister, she's always in the comment section. We had FolkTube, that that's also a new. I haven't seen you before, but thank you for joining, and do join next week as well. I was going to be short, but thank you, Oni, for joining in the comments as well as in the on the panel. And of course, Mwendetezi, asante sana. So to everyone, it's been a pleasure. It's been wonderful speaking with you all. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you on. You speak 3 African languages? Wow, that is cool. That is cool. Awesome. See, we need more of that too. We need to be quadru,
This
all
one
of
is a
that.
Kenyan. This one is a Kenyan. 3
Oh,
East
that's a
African.
Kenyan. Okay, if
It's
it's a
a
Kenyan,
good,
it's
it's a
just
good
Kawa.
indicator. Somebody 3 East African language. You know that is. Oh wait, no. Maybe not, because
Maybe not, because if
because
it's
I know Swahili, and Kenyans speak Swahili, tribal language, and English. I don't know.
yeah, you can't count. Okay, not counting English. Most of us speak 2 other languages apart from English. Your mother tongue and Kiswahili. But if he's saying 3, then it means at least he has 2 other African languages that he speaks.
No, one other African language.
No, apart from Kiswahili, there's 2 other. We not count English is not an East African language, so take English out. So he speaks 3. So Kiswahili would be the first one, and then there's 2 more. So
Yeah,
the
one
next
one
one
is
will be his
one is the
mother
language
tongue.
of his tribe. One is the language of his tribe.
Yes, the mother tongue, and then so he knows
And
another
now there's
language.
a third one.
Yes, so he knows a third one. Okay, so one more, one more outside of the. Okay. So Swahili, Amharic, and Oromia. Okay, cool. Okay, so yeah, that's 3 languages right there. Good for you. Yeah, people should invest in
Oh,
the.
so even Ethiopians speak. You see, so even Ethiopians probably speak 2 languages,
Yeah,
right?
well, Mika met a group of Kiswahili speakers in Ethiopia when he was traveling. Oh man, he's been to so many places. His experiences would just fill, volumes of books. But yeah, he had and Sheng, Sheng too. Anajua Sheng. Okay, SB, you're getting your colors and your credits. Okay, that's cool. Then you're a regular in Nairobi then.
Yeah, I told you.
Shengya Islando.
Yeah, yeah. Multilingual East African, you can just tell
Hey,
it.
you have to adapt. Uko Nairobi, unaenda Ushago, uko sijui wapi, uko Mombasa. You have to know, where you are and how to manage. But yeah, thank you for joining, and thank you for your comments. Yeah, it was fun. If we had all the time in the world, we'd be here all day. But you're all very cool. I'm grateful for your company, and I hope I see you all again next time. Okay, now you're just making the rest of us, look bad. Ati mpaka
Yeah.
Spanish. Kwenda huko. That's too much now. All right. Thank you, SB. Thank you, Marie Antoinette. Thank you, Mwendetezi. And as always, we will end with a prayer of gratitude to our ancestors for giving us a good dialogue, a good conversation, for increasing our store of knowledge and information. And with that, I thank them and I thank you all for joining. And good day for me, and good night, and wherever you are. Peace. Okay. Peace. Kwaheri and karibu.